find something, I will burn it all to the ground and start all over. Is that just me? I won't be able to live, for the record, this is going to be a bad live stream because all I'm going to be thinking about for this entire live stream is where the fuck did you put those goddamn motors? You colossal ass bag. They might, they could just be like right here too. And here's what's really annoying. I did something really clever with them. I don't know what that was, but I know that I did something very clever with them. Because I do. I think about the, I try not to lose stuff. And so like, I know that there's somewhere, when I find them, I'll be like, oh yeah, of course. That's the right place to put them. But, you know, up until the point where you think about where that place is, it's just an absolute nightmare. Let's see if I have an extra CO3. The other thing I could do is, and the reason why this is such a nightmare right now is I was just going to tear apart one of the, so I've got two analog 2S 1.6-inch builds, which is a bit much. And so the plan was, up until literally like 10 minutes before the live stream, the plan was to just tear one of these apart and just swap the AIO out. But like, that's kind of crazy. Like, I would rather sell one of these and then do a scratch build. You know what I'm saying? Especially because I have this set of motors that should be perfect for this. I'm also super curious how 10,000 kV motors would be on a lightweight analog 1.6. They might be like really efficient. Something that I learned between these two guys, so these are pretty much identical. One of them is on 0802 19,000 kV motors. The other one is on 1002 14,000 kV motors. They both fly fantastic. They're both 2S. I use the little Tiny Whoop 2S 300s. Gemfin 1610s on both. One of them has a CO3. The other one has a Caddx ANT. The one on the 1002s is significantly heavier than the one on the 802s, but it gets better runtime because it's a 14,000 kV motor and it's a 1002, so it stays cooler than the 802s. And so I do have the 802s motor limited down a little bit, but I'm just letting the 802s crank a higher kV to make up for the power difference. And so it would be really interesting to compare runtimes between these two and this fresh build. Because the fresh build is going to have an 1102 10,000 kV motor on a slightly bigger propeller. And then we've got 1002 14,000 and then 802 19,000 with a little bit of motor limiting. And so it would be really, really, really neat to compare the runtimes on all of these and then basically sell one of them. Shit, I might sell the scratch build with the X14, probably not, but you never know. Because I'll probably like it. But yeah, I gotta find the effing motors. I told you I'm not gonna be able to let this go. I'm just not. What's in here? Oh, these batteries. Why are these batteries in here? You go in here with these batteries. That's where you belong. 380, right? Yeah, 380. I just don't get why I wouldn't have put them right effing there. Did I give him to Patrick maybe because he was gonna buy a Modula 704?
Roasted charge.
Now I'm just making shit up. I mean, there is a chance that I put them where I should have, but I'm sure that that's not the case. Like, I should have put them in here, which is like my main Tiny Whoop stuff box. I could have also put them over here. Is this fun for you guys? Is it fun for you guys to watch me fucking lose my mind? Is that good live streaming? I'm gonna go crazy. I will not make it to the end of the stream without fully losing my mind it's good that I'm putting this away though. So, you know. Alright, so it's not in here, which is insane. It should be in here. But it's not. And it's not going to be. Why do I have this? Why do I have all these little weird pieces of carbon fiber in here? This is a strange box. This box that I'm in right now is an odd box. Here are 3 Mobula 7 V4 frames. Why do I have 3 extras? That's a bit much. I don't really need 3 extras here. Okay, this box ain't the one. This ain't the box. We've figured that out. So I figured one thing out. That's nice. They're not in here. How we doing with like you guys making me feel better? Is any? Yeah, I have a feeling. And say hello. Let me put this back in here. If you're going forward like you kill the throttle. Second thing that could be wrong, you could have motors that are spinning the wrong direction.
Not similar to that of the X12 flight controller. The legendary X12 on the Mobula 8 analog. We'll compare the differences on the bench and what's good and what's bad. Well, mostly good. What? It's a Mobula 8. And what is so awesome, people? So in today's video, we're going to look at the X14, which is the successor of the legendary X12 flight controller. Now this X12 flight controller had been on the Mobula 7s, the Mobula 8s, and it's been around for a very, very long time. So today we're going to take a look at what sets it apart from its predecessor. Right out of the box, you have a packet of connecting cables, the XT30 connector, and the flight controller itself. Now, taking a closer look at the flight controller, you can obviously see a couple of different things that's not similar to that of the X12 flight controller. Now, a couple of major features of this flight controller is that 16MB memory for black box, as well as the multiple UARTs that's available on this flight controller. One of the major things you'll notice is this connector that actually plugs into a USB-C, which of course is now more common in newer flight controllers these days. This flight controller also uses the new STM32G473 MCU chip, the same 12A continuous current for its ESCs, and an open VTX built in for up to 400mW and up to 2S LiPo input. Do check out the website happymodel.cn for the full pinouts and connection diagrams. Now the packet also provides you with an A30 LiPo connector, and this is for the 1S builds, but I have a spare 85mm frame and motors and props all ready, especially for this flight controller, so we're going to be building a Mobula 8. The motors of course are the standard EX1103 11,000 kV, especially for 2S. Do remember that if you're not getting the BNF, make sure the motors with the red dot is the one on the front right. Another thing that you want to take note is the fact that the camera for the X14 is totally different from the ones on the X12. As you can see, it is some smaller JST plug, and this connects to the standard JST of a normal analog camera. So I'll be using the Canex Ant, and that's because the plug actually goes straight into the camera itself, and that just saves me time from soldering. So I'm just going to plug that into the flight controller, and that's about it. For the canopy, I'll be using the Mobula 7 canopy. Now I've run out of Happy Model crown antennas, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to be using this RACP Maple Wireless. So if you're wondering about the filters, PIDs and whatnot, just bear in mind that the flight controller actually comes pre-tuned from Happy Model, so I'm going to be flying it in its factory settings. The only thing that I will change is the Express LRS, and what you're going to do is just put the flight controller into Wi-Fi mode, and when the ELRS pops up, comes up, just add your binding phrase and you are set. Now just quick polish off the lens to make sure that everything is clean, and
Ghost, fly Express LRS, I fly Crossfire. I fly those protocols because I don't ever want to have to think about fail-safe ever again. And today I did fail-safe. And that means I'm making a video about how to troubleshoot when your receiver is fail-safing. I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're going to learn something today. Do you know what a fail-safe is? I'm pretty sure you said yes to that. But I spent a lot of time answering people's questions, and I've found that a lot of people don't really know all of the things that can cause a fail-safe. So we're going to start this video by defining a fail-safe and talking about each of the steps that can fail to cause a fail-safe. Because troubleshooting a fail-safe is just going through those steps and figuring out which one is broken. And fail-safe means that the link between your controller and your flight controller is broken in some way, and then your quadcopter falls out of the air. So most people, when they think about a fail-safe, they think about the classic situation where you flew too far away, you didn't have enough range. Now, on modern protocols like Ghost, Crossfire, and Express LRS, even Tracer, the range is usually pretty extreme, and you have to try pretty hard to actually fail-safe it. That's one of the reasons you use those protocols. But on older protocols like FreeSky Spectrum and FlySky receivers, it wasn't too hard to fail-safe them. You go behind a building, you go too far away, boom, you fail-safe, quad falls out of the air. The other things that can cause a fail-safe are anything that could be interrupting the link, which basically amounts to the wiring. So we could have a bad signal wire, bad power wire, even a bad ground wire, and we could have damaged hardware. The receiver is more likely damaged than the module, because the module is safe and sound in your hands, and the receiver is out there in the world getting bashed to crap. Now, if you are smart, you will have RSSI and LQ set up in your goggle. And these are the two major metrics that you're going to use to tell if you are at risk of fail-safing due to excess range. And of those two, LQ is the one that you really want to be paying attention to. So LQ stands for link quality, and it basically refers to what percent of the data packets between the controller and the flight controller are getting through. At 100% LQ, all your data gets through and everything is wonderful. At 70% LQ, 70% of your packets are getting through, and you could probably still keep flying, but it's not the best situation. And as the LQ goes down, eventually you reach a point where the link is essentially dead and you fail safe. So then what about RSSI? RSSI is the signal strength. It is the sort of raw loudness of the signal that's being received. And it's actually not how I think you should test whether your link is at risk of fail-safing. Because think about a situation where we're sitting in a quiet room and I'm just like screaming in your ear. Well, I have a lot of RSSI, a lot of signal strength. Now think about the same situation where we're at a loud rock concert and I'm screaming in your ear and you can barely hear me because just the music is that loud. In both cases, I'm putting out a lot of energy. I'm putting out a lot of RSSI, but in one case there's a lot of competing noise which is drowning me out. So RSSI alone cannot tell you whether your link's about to fail safe, because you don't know the ambient noise, and there's always ambient RF noise all around the environment. You don't know what the noise level is. Since you don't know the noise level, you can't know the signal to noise ratio, which is what you would need to know to tell if you were about to fail safe. So if you're curious whether you're at risk of fail safing because your link is because you're flying too far away or you're flying behind an obstacle, look at LQ. And if LQ is less than 100%, maybe 90, 95%, then you should at least think about what you're doing, because that starts to be pretty unusual, because these protocols are so freaking good. Okay. So what is RSSI good for then? Well, that brings us to today's video. Take a look at the RSSI here. On the table right close together like this, the RSSI should be extremely high. One of the confusing things about RSSI is that it's measured in a unit called dBm, decibel milliwatts, and dBm start at 0 and go down. Okay, so the dBm that we're seeing here is about -18, -20, and that's actually really, really good. Like, that's like we're practically touching. And then the actual actual lower bound for what might be like a low RSSI, well, it depends on various conditions, but an RSSI of around negative 90 to negative 115 dBm would be where many typical like Ghost, Express LS Tracer, Crossfire would fail safe. Okay, this is like extremely good RSSI. But watch what happens if I move this quadcopter just a little bit further away. You see that it's occasionally dipping down into the negative 70s and negative 80s. It's happening really quickly. So I wouldn't blame you if you found it a little hard to see. That just should never be happening this close. That's way, way off. So the way that we can use RSSI is that, like, under controlled conditions, like just a few feet apart here on the bench, if we see an RSSI that is lower than we would expect, that could indicate a hardware problem, like a messed up antenna or a damaged receiver or something like that. And if you're not sure what like a normal value of RSSI would be, pull out your quadcopter, pull out your radio, pull out your module, and put them, like 1 meter apart. Okay, 3 feet for you Americans. So European now. Put them like a 1 meter apart. You got to make sure the orientation of the antennas is consistent between your tests, because changing the antenna orientation will definitely affect the results. So you're going to put them exactly the same orientation, exactly the same distance, and then just look at the RSSI, and then pull out another quad, and just get a baseline for what number you're used to seeing. And then in a situation like this, where you have a random failsafe, you look at the RSSI and go, there's something right here. Now, if I had looked at that number and I had seen a consistently high RSSI, negative 20, right, something like that, I would still have to figure out why the failsafe happened. But I would be reasonably confident that it wasn't bad hardware. It's not, nothing's 100%. But in this case, I feel reasonably confident that I do have bad hardware. So how am I going to proceed? I'm going to grab another quad with Ghost in it, and I'm going to do the old process of elimination. We can see this number is hovering in the 20s, maybe 30s, sometimes a little bit down to the 40s as I move it around, but in general, it is not dipping into the 80s and the 90s like we saw with the other receiver. So that is indicating to us that that receiver has a problem, or maybe the antenna has a problem. But that helps us believe that our module is fine, because if the module is messed up, we would see the problem across multiple quads. Now, the most obvious thing that could cause low signal strength would be the antenna being damaged, and I don't see any fraying in the wire, nor do I see any damage here. Now, it's quite common to get a little bit of like prop damage here at the ends of the antenna, and that does have a small effect on the RSSI, but it wouldn't cause these wild swings like we're seeing. Nevertheless, this antenna is practically completely intact. I wonder if I just unplug and replug the UFL connector, what will happen? Maybe even a little worse. It's definitely solidly hitting the 80s. 100. When I put my hand over it, it went all the way down to, oh wow. When I put my hand over it, it's just sitting solidly at negative 80 to negative 90. That's just no good. I feel like we probably have a damaged receiver here. Just in the interest of science, I am going to replace the antenna. But I just don't see any damage to the antenna, so I don't think that's it. Now, at this point, you may be wondering why I am not investigating the flight controller, and I'm also not investigating the wiring between the flight controller and the receiver. And the reason for that is that the RSSI, the signal strength, is 100% a part of the wireless radio interface between this antenna and this antenna. Okay? Nothing about the flight controller can change the RSSI that's measured by the receiver. So the fact that low RSSI is a symptom completely rules out anything to do with the flight controller. It's not the issue. We're going to replace the receiver. That's what we're going to do. Okay, moment of truth. RSSI is normal as expected. It was a bad receiver. And that's often what it is. So let's sum up the troubleshooting process. The first question you want to ask when you're troubleshooting fail-safes is it always the same quad that's having the problem? Or are there multiple quads that are having the problem? If there are multiple quads having the problem, that points to your radio as the common link. If it's only one quad that's having the problem, it points to the receiver or the antenna most likely on that quad. Next, you want to look at your RSSI. If your RSSI is strong and consistent, then probably your antenna is fine and maybe your receiver is fine. It tends to indicate that the hardware is okay. If RSSI is high and you're still having fail-safes, it could point to a problem with the wiring, such as you have a bad power, your 5-volt wire or your signal wire is damaged, or it could point to interference. That's the other thing. If you only fail-safe in certain locations but not other locations, then it could be local interference in the area. There's not a lot you can do about that except to increase your transmit power, maybe, but probably you're just going to fly in a different location. That's going to do it. I got to put this quadcopter back together because I'm using this for my, see this KISS Ultra flight controller? Yeah. I am going to be putting a FetTech G4 and a Betaflight 4.3 flight controller in this exact same quad, and I'm testing them to see how they fly. Get rid of that receiver. So I got to get this thing put back together, get back to work on that, but that's going to do it for this video. I'm so glad you came, and I hope it was helpful to you if you're troubleshooting this problem. If you value this kind of content, can I remind you that I have a Patreon page. Patreon is a website where you can subscribe to me for as little as $2 a month, or more if you feel like I've earned it. The amount that you contribute is totally up to you. It's just a little monthly payment that I can count on. It helps me, YouTube can be very fickle. But the Patreon means that every month I feel confident that I'm going to get a certain amount from the people who support what I do. And if today's the day where you feel like doing that, then thank you. And if today's not the day, if you don't feel like I've earned it yet, that's fine too. I give away all my content for free. I help everybody. Everyone is welcome to email me or message me on Facebook. Those are the main ways to get a hold of me. I always take care of my patrons first, but I zero my inbox mostly every day, maybe more than once a day. And hopefully, if today's not the day, then someday it will be. There's a link in the video description if that day is the day for you, patreon.com. And that's going to do it for this video. Happy flying. What are you doing in here? The least you could do is subscribe or join my Patreon.
정명성에 있는 그런 맛은 아니에요.
자, 오늘은 미슐랭 루로판을 먹으러 간다. 아니 루로판도 알잖아. 근데 미슐랭을 받은 루로판 집이야. 왜냐면 이 루로판이라는 게 엄청 진짜 기본 음식이거든. 이제 엄청 흔하게 보시는 그런 기본 음식이야. 도대체 다른 집이랑 차이가 뭔가?
그걸 평가를 하는 기준이 전문가들의 평가하는 게 아니고 사람들이 이렇게 올리는 그걸 평가하지.
다 참고도 한데
나도 참고한다.
내가 알기로는 뭐 아닐 수도 있는데 뭐 평점도 보고 와서 뭐 청결 상태도 보고 뭐 먹어도 보고 뭐 그런 건가 봐.
대단하네.
그리고 아까 루로판을 그동안 많이 먹어봤기 때문에
그렇지.
맛을 알잖아.
평가를 할 수 있지.
모르고 먹었으면 이게 맛있는 집인지 모를 텐데 그동안 루로판을 수도 없이 먹어봤으니까 이 집이 맛있는지 아닌지 알 수 있지.
알지. 그 여기 어디지?
여기가 화시 야시장이야. 여기는 뭐 발 마사지도 있고 어디 있고 이것저것 다양하게 할 수 있는 데가 많아.
우리 마사지 이런 걸 별로 좋아하니까.
맞아. TV 보니까 맞다. 칼 마사지가 있더라고. 칼 마사지 어떤데? 칼로 마사지를 받는 거야.
내가 또 그런데 관심이 없으니까 마사지.
그치. 나도 마사지를 별로 안 좋아해서.
그 사람들은 많지는 않다. 이 시간이
지금 아직 시간이 애매한 시간이야. 지금 오후 3시잖아. 그래서 여기 사람들은 벌써
한잔 하시네.
한잔 하시고 계시네. 여기도 한잔 하고 계시네. 뭘 아시는 분들이네. 이게 아까 또 북부랑 남부랑 루로판이 다른데 북부는 고기를 엄청 얇게 썬 고기를 쓰고 남부는 좀 큰 고기.
그럼 여기는 어디야? 어떤 주?
여기는 북부지.
그럼 큰 고기를 쓰네?
아니 얇은 고기를 쓰지.
그게?
남부가 크고 여기는 작고.
아, 이렇게.
얇게. 그냥 루로판 할 때 루가 조리다라는 뜻이거든. 둘인 거야. 간장을 둘인 거야. 깔끔하게 잘 됐네. 1975년이네. 이 거리가 다 역사가 있는 거리인가 보다.
종시장 생기기 전에 아마 이거 있었는데.
다 큰 거 먹을 거야, 작은 거 먹을 거야.
그럼 우리 일단 작은 것도 먹어야 되는 거 아니야? 먹어보고 또 다른 거 시켜야 돼. 국수 양 얼마나 많았어? 못 먹었잖아. 이거 작은 거로 좀 시켜.
4개 시키고 탄 거 3개 시키자. 4개. 다 먹잖아. 근데 보통 미슐랭이고 하면은 가격이 비싸야 되는데 작은 거가 40이야. 2,000원. 아니 루로판 미슐랭은 어떻게 받는 거야 대체. 내가 또 찾아보니까 보통 루로판 그 국물이 갈색이거든. 근데 이 집은 살짝 짜장면처럼 검정색이라 하대.
갈색이랑 금리랑 똑같은데 좀 더 진하대 소리네. 처음 알고 이게 접히게 돼 있구나. 열었다가 내가 떼놓은 거.
아 그런 거야?
근데 시장이 일반 시장하고 이게 정리가 굉장히 된 그런 시장이네. 좀 뭐 현대식으로 하니?
그리고 역사가 좀 깊은 식당들이 많은 것 같아. 보니까 언제부터 시작됐다는 게 맞네. 1900몇 년.
1987년도 돼 있더라고. 시장으로 돼 있어.
그게 미슐랭이라고 해. 미슐랭.
아, 이거 저래 있구나.
이거 나오는 것 같은데. 음식이 엄청 빨리 나오네. 먹을 거야? 이야, 색깔 봐봐라, 색깔.
뭐 모르겠다, 뭐.
모르겠다고? 색깔이 진하잖아. 아빠,
이게 고기가 아닌 것 같은데, 그냥.
어?
고기가 또 채소 같은데 고기가 들었단
이거
말이야.
고기야, 고기.
그렇게.
아니, 색깔이 완전 다르구만. 그동안 뭘 먹은 거야? 루로판 한 먹었네.
살짝 여기에 또 조금 진하네.
살짝이 아니고 좀 많이 진하다. 색깔이 진짜 카메라상으로 튀어나오는 거 모르겠는데 진짜 진해.
아, 진하다.
응.
진해. 고기 맛도 진하네.
이게 야채가 아니고 고기야. 진짜 오래 삶았구나.
그렇네.
와, 이거 죽이는데?
맛있어? 맛이 좀 진해.
진짜 진해.
좀 진하네. 아, 고기 농락이 썰으니까
고기.
고기 같지가 않다.
진짜
그렇지?
부드럽잖아. 우리 루로판이 그런 음식이야.
고기 껍질 이런 걸 했네. 껍질, 그죠? 그거 안 먹어봐.
탕 먹어봐, 탕.
이거 진짜 진하지? 국물에 엄청 진해. 그렇죠. 국물 엄청 진하지? 그 국물이 살짝 진한데 단맛은 뭐지? 뭘 단맛을 뭘 가지고 단맛을 내는 거겠어?
설탕?
설탕 가지고 단맛을 하는 것 같은데. 그 어디 가서 뭐 뭐야?
고기에서 나오는 그런 단맛 같아. 아이가?
그거 우리 그 당근이잖아 왜? 그럼 그거 안 같아? 당근?
당근에서 나오는? 대리본에서 나오는 단맛? 그건 되게 특이하지 않나?
맛있나?
응.
진하네. 그런 건 안 먹나? 그래.
아, 이거 봐. 오리 계란이야.
오리야? 오리가 이렇게 작아?
맞죠?
어우. 이건 뭐 쑥쑥 씌우는 거 아니지?
그냥 이것도 똑같아. 루로판이랑 조리 방식 똑같아.
맛있는 포인트는 이거 진짜 오랜 시간 조리해서 그래서 이 지방 다 녹아있어요. 이 뺄적은 끈적끈적하는 게 지방 먹자마자 녹아있어요.
그게 맛있는, 오케이.
그냥 구운 계란이네.
구운 계란이라고?
구운 계란. 이게 삶은 거 아니야? 구운 거야.
그러네.
구운 거.
그러냐, 근데 아빠 이거 끓인 거야.
구워가지고 좀, 그렇지.
근데 좀 겉에가
단단하지?
좀 단단하네.
오랜
아빠 근데 오랜 시간 동안 해서 그런 거 같은데? 엄청 오래. 얘도 엄청 오래 한 거잖아.
맞아.
같이 했나 보다. 고기가 엄청 부드러운 게 원래 루로판 그 맛있는 집 기준이 그거야. 엄청 오래 삶아서 고기가 부드럽게 씹히는. 없는 듯, 있는 듯. 그게 뭔가 맛있는 기준인 거야.
오래 졸였다.
오래 졸여서.
그리고 고기가 너무 부드러워. 그냥 이 고기인지, 그냥 무물처럼 확 삶아놓은 게 그런 느낌이잖아.
이게 내가 봤을 때는 맛이 뭔가 지금 옷같이 뭔가 살짝 매운맛이 있어. 아빠는 있나? 살짝 매운맛이 조금 있어. 일반 루로판에 비해서.
그럼 너무 생각이 아주 미미하게.
진짜 미미하게 있어.
아주 매운 거 있네.
그리고 얘가 원래 이렇게 그 밥이 이렇게까지 까맣지 않거든. 진하게 만들었어. 간이 좀 세. 센 편이야. 이 미슐랭 주는 사람들이 외국 사람들이잖아. 그러니까 이 사람들이 와서 여기서 먹을 거 아니야. 그거 외국인한테도 너무 맛있는 거야. 그래서 미슐랭을 받지 않았을까?
그럴 수도 있겠는데. 우리는 이래 대만의 정통
어.
자연의 맛을 좀 좋아하는데
응.
이거는 양념을 첨가되고 오래 졸이고 이래가지고 만드는 거다 보니까
응.
정통성이 있는 그런 맛은 아닙니다.
그렇게 무슨 소린데?
아니 본인의 맛,
1975년도에 했는데.
본인의 맛,
응.
돼지를 쓰면 돼지의 본인의 맛
응.
이렇게 없다는 거지. 양념 이런 걸 많이 해가지고 맛있게 만드는 거지.
여기 1975년도에 열어서 더 정통이 있을 텐데.
그래, 자연의 맛하고는 조금 어려운 거다 이거지.
나도 김치 싫더라. 배추만 먹어야 되는데. 배추를 먹어야 되는데. 거기다가 이것저것 추가해가지고 김치를 만들었잖아.
이제 우리가 요리할 때 이런 게 있잖아. 좀 좋은 재료를 많이 넣어서 맛있게 하는 거야. 그게 요거단 말이야.
그러니까 그 전통적이지 않다는 말이 무슨
아,
말이야?
정통이 아니라 자연의 맛.
네?
자연스러운 맛. 그건 조금 다르다.
원래 그 노력한 집이 자연의 본맛.
그런 맛 말고 그런 향이지만은 재료를 쓸 때 자연의 맛을 해주려 하고 내가 똑같이 그냥 좋은 재료를 많이 넣어가지고 맛있게 만들어가는 그런 거거든. 요게 이제 맛있게 만드는 재료를 많이 넣어가지고 맛있게 만드는 게 요 식품이 같아. 요판 요리 같아. 양은 진짜 자연의 맛이야. 그거는 잊을 수가 없다. 그거는 딱 본인의 맛. 양과 그 당귀 그 고시가지고 만드잖아. 그거는 자연이 만들잖아. 이거는 많은 재료를 넣어서 많은 시간을 활용해서 만드는 거 같아.
거기도 자연의 맛이었네. 그거
거기는 나는
소금 물에만 그러니까 데쳐가지고 한 건데 그리고 가장 자연스러운 맛이 있는데
거의 나는 그런 맛이 안 났어.
거기는 전혀 인위적인 걸 섞지 않았어. 진짜 소금하고 물밖에 없어. 그게 가장 자연적인 맛인데 이 집이 그냥 미슐랭 아니고 모르고 왔어도 좀 뭔가 특별하다 생각했을 것 같거든.
젊네.
좀 먹자마자 좀 달라.
그래 대본 나는 음식 요거 말고도 있을 거야 아마. 요거 말고도 아까 저 보니까 돼지를 통째로 해내는 게 있더라고. 그거 한번 먹어봐.
그래 그건 또 이제 아빠가 또 다르게 느낄 수 있으니까.
그러면 이게 음식이 같지는 않을 거야 아마. 그런 걸 한번 보실 거야.
然后在那个场地上看到，就是他们连续从2019年开始连续7年拿到米其林的推荐。
7년 동안 계속 7년 동안.
연속으로
2017년부터.
지금까지.
아 그러면은 그게 1년에 한 번씩 하는 건 아니네.
매년 해서 연속으로 받은 건 7년 내내.
대단하네. 그런 그 맛을
매년 와서 뭔가
체크를 하네.
매년 와서 뭔가 봐.
맛을 차이가 있는지 없는지.
야, 이거 색깔 봐봐. 봐봐, 까맣잖아. 아, 이게 색깔만 봐도 아빠 아빠는 자연의 맛이 아닌데 어떡하지?
그래.
미슐랭 7년 받은 뭐하노? 아빠가 좋아하지 않는 자연의 맛.
내가 좀 입맛이 내가 좀 청량하다고 봐야지. 이제 맛을 알겠네. 소스 진짜 오래 삶는 거네.
엄청 오래 삶았잖아.
해도 많이 먹고.
이거랑 똑같은 데 있어요.
근데 밥 면을 너무 조금 있으니까 저게 안 돼. 이걸 먹으니까 전에 오네. 이게 생강이 좀 참 없는데. 생강 혹시
건강에 보통 이런 데는 안 들어.
생강이 없어?
아니, 이런 데안 들어. 이제 생강용으로 만들어라고. 대만에 있는 생강 좋은 거 있다.
아니야. 이거 생강하고 맛있는 게 있는데.
내가 이런 종류의 고기를 나는 보통 내 돈 주고 시키지 않아. 내가 이렇게 뭔가 조려진 고기를 별로 안 좋아하거든. 근데 이 소스가 너무 진해서 난 진짜 내 입맛이야. 그래서 내 돈 주고 사 먹을 것 같아 나는. 이게 생각이 안 나.
이거는 뭐 육질이 그냥 막 찢겨질 것 같아. 찢어질 것 같아 이렇게 봐. 무슨 일 맛있는 거야. 깊다. 깊숙하다.
그 미슐랭 치즈도 그런 거 아니지?
음식이 틀려. 이거는 이게 껍질을 봐라. 이걸 가지고 밥을 하는데.
그치. 얘를 잘게 써보겠지. 이거 90.
이것도 외값이네.
95.
나 비싼 거 좋아하는 거야. 비싼 게 맛있다. 이거 생강 맛있어. 이제 끝났다.
국물 봐봐라. 나 진짜 이런 거 처음 본다. 유럽판에 이렇게 진한 국물 들어가는 거. 나 여기다가 이게 밥에다가 이렇게 뿌려 먹어야지. 아,
이게
와, 죽는다.
이게 밥에 비벼 물도 맛있긴 맛있겠다.
아, 그런다니까?
내가 솔직히 요즘 쌀을 잘 안 먹어.
가면다가 얘를 담궈.
아, 이거 맛있지.
담궈서 이렇게 먹으면 국물을
이게 더 맛있겠다.
이렇게 해서 담궈.
그래.
담궈줘. 이렇게 담궈.
아, 짜다 이제.
그리고 먹잖아?
아하. 이게 맛이 있기도 못해 이거라. 자꾸 잠이 오는구나.
많이 오는 게 아니고 리액션.
오케이.
아, 최고. 최고. 진짜 최고. 이 집은 진짜 다르다.
아, 거기요.
진짜 다르다. 와, 이 국물이 짱이는데 맛있어.
네, 아우. 나는
맛있다. 아, 근데 맛있어. 진짜. 진짜 밥이랑 먹는 거. 진짜 나 원탑이다, 원탑.
아, 거기요. 근데 엄청 안 맞네.
그러니까 나 원래 이렇게 해설적으로 먹지 않는데.
근데 고기 이걸 보니까 우리 장인정식 하잖아. 이래 막 만들 때 순대를 요리고 조리고 따리고 보고 이런 그런 맛이네. 아주 뭐 정성이 들어가는 그런 맛이 난다.
크기는 동탑만큼 큰데 가격이 착해. 근데 이 집은 뭔가 그릇도 좀 유리그릇으로 해주네. 좀 좋은 그릇으로 주네. 사실 식당에서 쓰기 힘들거든.
아, 그렇지.
왜냐면 또 플라스틱 써.
맞아. 이거 흐르기 좋네.
원래 플라스틱이잖아.
생각도 못해.
왜냐면 깨지니까. 이 설거지 할 때 보통 이제 너무 바쁘다 보면 그릇을 이렇게 하는 경우가 있어. 그럼 오다가 탕탕탕 이러잖아.
맞네.
근데 유리그릇 하면 진짜 잘 깨지거든. 아마 그릇 진짜 많이 깨뜨렸을걸? 유리그릇 식당에서 쓰기 쉽지 않아.
지금 요번에 그 며칠 동안 먹는 음식은 전부 좀 특이한 음식을 가지고 많이 먹는 보편적으로 먹는 음식이라고 하는데 굉장히 그래도 이거 맛도 있고 이래 즐길 수 있는 그런 음식이네. 이제는
가볼까?
보시는 또 해야 되겠나 보시.
원수님은 집을 가야지.
그지 와가 이 사람은 이거 못 봐나?
집 가야지. 집 가야 된다.
안 돼.
집가 쉬어야 된다. 배불러서 자야 된다.
저녁에 제가 여기 와가지고 좀 둘러보고 공부증 있잖아. 길거리 뭐지?
방금 많이 먹었잖아.
길거리 뭐지? 간단하게.
지금 안 가면 타이베이 갇힌다 아빠. 곧 퇴근 시간이라 2시간 걸려 타구양까지.
일단 가면서 있으면은 그리고 없으면은 그냥 가고. 잘했어.
자, 그리고 오늘의 총평.
거기는 저 정도 처리 하기가 힘들거든.
맞아.
전에 양념을 해가지고 전에 안에까지 싹 배기도록 삶을 정도면 맨날 며칠을 삶았을 것 같아.
맞다. 그래서 오늘 총평 너무 만족스럽다.
훌륭했다. 정식을 먹었다. 정식을 먹었는데.
아하, 정성. 아우, 큰일이. 됐나. 너무 까먹었어, 얘. 하이시오. 미안하죠, 오파이.
Thank you for €5 from Soul. Outside of DJI, what's the best goggles? Is Avatar X worth it? If I wasn't allowed to buy DJI, Walksnail would be my next choice in terms of digital FPV systems. Yep. It's not as good as DJI. It's solidly better than analog. It has a good variety of cameras available. A nice variety. They have the gimbal that you can use for head tracking. it's a decent ecosystem. It's just in a world. It's just that DJI is better in almost every way, except that they're DJI, and maybe you don't like that for various reasons. So, yeah. I mean, what are your choices? It's Walksnail, DJI, or HT0. HT0 is excellent for racing. It's good in some ways for long range because it's a one-way communication platform, not bidirectional, and that has some advantages. But in terms of range, penetration, and image quality, for sort of general fun flying, cruising, and bando style freestyle penetration, HT0 loses to Walksnail and DJI. So I'd probably take Walksnail as my general purpose all round, and I would get the Goggles X. But I have to say, there are plenty of people in the world. There are plenty of people in the world who are perfectly happy with Walksnail. Don't take this the wrong way. But there are plenty of people in the world who are annoyed at Walksnail for not being as better as they thought they were going to be. They bought into Walksnail and they hoped that they would. They were like, it's okay now, but I believe it's going to get better. And then it didn't really get any better. And meanwhile, DJI releases the O3 and the O4, and they just keep getting better and better and better. And there are plenty of people who bought into Walksnail and then were like, I don't know, I'm going to go DJI, and they're kind of annoyed and wish they had just done that in the first place. So you have to be careful that you might be one of those people. But if you have a good reason for not doing DJI, then Walksnail is the next one back. Can you use Walksnail with the SkyZone 040 Pro? Yes, any goggle with an HDMI input can work with the Walksnail video receiver. They have a standalone video receiver. You will get some reduction in performance. You'll get increased latency because you're coming in through the HDMI input, which adds a little bit of latency. So that's not good because digital systems already have higher latency, but it's not like an absolute deal breaker. I just saw your video about the goggles. But it was 2 years ago. What do you think is the best goggles to buy today? Asks Hakuna. Hakuna, that's a great question. I think today, if you're shopping for goggles, it used to be that you would pick your video system based on the goggles. And today, I don't think that's the case. Today, I think you should pick your video system based on the qualities of the video system and then buy the best goggles you could buy that work with that system. So the four video systems are Analog, HT0, DJI, and Walksnail. And they all have different pros and cons, which would take 45 minutes to get into the deep pros and cons. Maybe I should remake that video. In short, Analog is the cheapest. Analog has ultra low latency. Analog can go very long range because you can get 10-watt analog VTXs because all of the analog hardware is decades old and is just a commodity. So somebody's like, I want to make a 5-watt video transmitter. They just make it. Somebody else is like, I want to make a 10-watt video transmitter. They just make it. So analog is good for long range. It can have high power. It's inexpensive, although it can get expensive if you buy high-end stuff. Analog has the worst video quality. It's standard definition. It's like screen rolls and static, but it definitely gets the job done. Analog very good for racing as well, but very poor image quality compared to digital systems. HT0, essentially analog on steroids, slightly better, noticeably better image quality. Fantastic latency, great for racing, more expensive, and not quite as good for long range because they have a 1-watt video transmitter, and that's it. Only HT0 makes these video transmitters, and they haven't released a 10-watt one, probably for regulatory reasons. It's not actually legal. But analog, who cares? Some Chinese company's just going to make a 10-watt video transmitter. Good luck coming after them. So HT0 not quite as good for long range because it doesn't have high output power. Great for racing. Not that great for like freestyle and general use, in my opinion, because for general use, the ultra low latency that is HT0's real strong point unless you're like a racer who really cares about low latency or a freestyle pilot doing really precise proximity moves, the higher latency of the other systems is still enough to get the job done, and they have other advantages in terms of image quality, range, and penetration. Say it's HC0. Really great for racing, the choice for racing, and it's hard to think of anywhere else other than racing where HC0 is just definitively like, that's the one you should get. DJI, absolute best image quality, range, penetration, hands down. I will fight you if you disagree. There's people out there who say Walksdale has better image quality than DJI, and I'm like, are you insane? Are you okay? But that's just me. The most expensive, although not by as much as it used to be, as everything else has gotten more expensive too. The main downsides of DJI are that if you don't like what DJI gives you, screw you. You go in the restaurant and they say you can have steak or you can have chicken, and you're like, but I want fish, and they're like, sorry, they give you the steak and it's the best steak you ever ate, but you wanted fish, right? That's DJI. Bug fixes? Maybe. Sometimes. Also, sometimes they just ignore you. Feature requests? With analog and HC0, very responsive to feature requests, bug fixes, very connected to the community, very, even Walksnail. DJI, the least of that, although some of that. And of course, there's people who don't like DJI as a company or their political affiliations, potentially. People see ideological reasons not to buy DJI. Absolute best range, penetration, image quality, and overall user experience. But like, if you fly iNav and they didn't support the iNav OSD for years, they didn't support iNav OSD, and you were like, you might not feel so good about it. And then Walksnail, like DJI Lite, if you will. Walksnail is as good as DJI was 3 years ago. That's the way I would sum it up. Sorry, Walksnail. Walksnail has a much larger variety of cameras and video transmitters. So, for example, Walksnail has a low light camera you can use. DJI, you got one camera. That's it. Don't like it? Too bad. Suck it. Walksnail, you can choose a low light camera. You could choose all these different 4K recording. There's a lot of variety in the Walksnail video transmitters and cameras that DJI doesn't have. But the performance isn't quite as good. It's almost as good. If DJI didn't exist, Walksnail would be like, people would be like, ooh, Walksnail, you're doing great. Walksnail is like the B- student whose sibling gets A+ all the time. Walksnail comes home with their report card. They're like, Dad, I got a B-. Dad's like, why are you not like your son, like your brother? He got straight A's. Yeah, let's see.
Can I say, but it's also like the B student is an extracurricular, so the A+ student has decided to join extracurriculars as well, right? Because it's like Walksnail is kind of pushing DJI's development, right? Like,
Absolutely.
you mentioned iNav OSD. DJI just patched in iNav OSD natively.
Yep.
Like, there was an update like days ago. So it's like, these things do happen eventually, but I think a lot of these things would not have happened. Like 1S DJI, cheap box goggles might not have happened without Walksnail existing.
Right.
I think that's
the O4 Lite is a direct response to the Walksnail 1S video transmitter. Before the O4 Lite, DJI didn't have a 1S capable video transmitter. It was just the big heavy O3, and suck it, you get what we give you. And Walksnail, I think, pushed them to do that. Absolutely. The goggles N3, an inexpensive box goggle for the DJI system. Walksnail pushed them to do that. Yeah. I think that if you only give a shit about your user experience, you'll buy DJI. But if you care about other things, like you want to reward Walksnail for being the one to make the move first, even though they aren't quite as good. They're out there, they're listening, they're doing things like the color OSD they supported. They had a 1S VTX years ahead of DJI. They're out there, they're actually paying attention, they're doing the thing, and then 2 years later, DJI comes along and is like, oh, you guys wanted that? Okay, here. And they shit out a product that's 50% better than anything Walksnail ever did. And people are like, yeah, DJI, thank you. And Walksnail's like, do we get anything for like actually having done the work? And some people are like, yes, walk still. I'm not going to reward that behavior. And other people are like, I don't care. I just want a good product. And I don't really, I go both ways. I see it both ways. So that's the 4 systems. You're going to pick one of those systems. And then your choice of goggle is easy. You buy the DJI system, you're going to get the G3 or the N3. That's basically it. Or maybe the G2 or the Integra. But like you're just going to pick one. You buy walk still, you're going to get the goggles X. Or maybe the goggles L if you can't afford the goggles X. But like, it's not which is the best goggle, it's which is the best video system for me, and then your choice of goggle is relatively small. The other thing, Render has a good point. I'll close on this. Although Walksnail absolutely deserves credit for the things that they do, they also promise way more than they deliver. Walksnail is constantly like, hey guys, we're gonna do this thing, and then like they don't do it, or years later they do it. Like I'm thinking of the Android app for their goggles. It took over a year after their goggles were released with promise for app support to release this Android app. Maybe significantly more. I'm not sure how long it was in real life. I'm sure it was more than a year. Or they'll be like, hey guys, we're going to have an updated video system in August of 2024 that's going to have even better range of penetration. Peeps, crickets. Or they release a product and it has some flaw, like the overheating. The Goggles X overheated when they first released, and they had to do all these recalls. And to their credit, they usually get it right eventually, but like they definitely have some missteps. So nobody's perfect. Alright. DJI planned obsolescence. Yeah. With DJI, you're going to get 4 or 5 years out of your hardware. And then DJI is going to stop supporting it, basically. And then you can keep using it, but if you need to buy any new hardware, you're screwed. Anyway. And it's like, and I find myself thinking, okay, Walksnail, you have this sort of moral high ground where you're making these moves, and you're doing what's good for the community, you're releasing, but like how many times are you going to like release a flawed product or say you're going to do something and then not do it before people, you burn up that goodwill and people are like, screw it, I just want a product that works, and they go buy DJI. Yeah, okay. Would you choose the DJI O4 or Walksnail? Asks JP, and then Zawse says, I think we all have this question. Okay, I'll answer it. The O4. I'm sorry. I guess it's my day to not be political about manufacturers. Like, the thing is, here, let me make the question more interesting. Because as a YouTube creator, I have all the systems. So I can pick the O4 today, and I can pick Walksnail tomorrow if Walksnail's what I need. Let's. I'm sorry, my voice is changing. I'm becoming a man. Let's assume that I'm a typical hobbyist who is only going to invest in one system. Because Walksnail has the GT transmitter at 2 watts. Walksnail has the 1S. Some of the advantages of the 1S get knocked out by the O4 Lite. I think the O4 Lite beats the Walksnail 1S pretty handily. It's not quite as lightweight, but it's so much more capable in so many ways. If all I cared about was freestyle flight, I would be mighty tempted to go with the Walksnail GT and the Pro camera. The Walksnail Pro camera is so much better than the O4 for just typical freestyle flying in terms of its low light sensitivity and dynamic range. It's not going to give as good a recorded image, but that's okay because I'm just going to have a GoPro on my drone. Or I'm just going to fly for fun and record the DVR, and that's good enough. If I were trying to get cinematic stuff, or if I wanted to do freestyle and not carry a GoPro, O4 all the way. O4 all the way. existence of the 04 Lite takes a big chunk out of Walksnail's value proposition, because one of Walksnail's value propositions is the versatility of their system, that they have a 1S flight controller or a video transmitter, that they have the Moonlight that can record 4K, that they have a repeater that nobody else, DJI's not going to make a repeater, that they have HDMI out without having to do Cosmos Streamer and all that BS. But the existence of the 1S for micros was something that DJI just didn't have an answer for, and now they do. I think that at the end of the day, if you just ask me if you could only have one system, would it be the DJI L4 or would it be Walksnail? Just the overall value proposition of the DJI system is high enough that I would probably go that direction over Walksnail. That anything that DJI didn't give me, that Walksnail would give me, I would just be getting such a sort of a nice, massaged, happy. I'd be like the guys in the Matrix, right? And I'm what's the guy's name? Cypher. I'm Cypher, and I'm eating the steak, and I'm like, I know that this steak doesn't exist, and it's just my brain telling me I'm eating a juicy steak, but I choose to go back into the Matrix, and I choose to just lay there and be fed my nutrient through tubes while my brain is going, and I think I'm eating steak, and that's DJI, and I choose, oh, put me in the Matrix, oh, 4K, oh, look, it's so easy to bind, oh my god, I can update the firmware without some bullshit cable that I have to plug in to USB. I just plug in a USB cable and I update the firmware and the goggles, and it works, and it just has great range and penetration, and not all this stupid, just go out and fly. Oh, and I know that makes me a stupid sheep, and that Neo's out there flying Walksnail and HD0 and fighting the agents and is better person than me, but if I had to, at the end of the day, I'd be 51%. Give me the steak and put me back in the Matrix, and only 49%. I want to wear a cool coat and dodge bullets. So it would be the 04. But I say that with the full acknowledgement that Walksnail and HD0 are the systems that Neo and Trinity would use while they're out there fighting the agents and saving humanity. I entertain myself sometimes. I can't believe I remembered that character's name. That's great. I love that actor. What a great scene that was. When you learn that spoiler for The Matrix, a movie that's probably, oh God, what year did Matrix come out? Spoiler, Cypher was the mole. That scene in the restaurant, and the camera pulls out and he's eating a steak. And he's like, I know that this steak doesn't exist, and it pulls out, and he's sitting there with Agent Smith, and you're like, oh! What a great movie. How would you compare the Walksnail Moonlight to the 04? Well, I would love to compare the Walksnail Moonlight to the 04. In fact, I meant to do that this week, but I can't bind my Walksnail Moonlight to my Goggles X because the firmware is so old, and in order to update the firmware on the Walksnail Moonlight, pause. See, in order to update the firmware, sorry, pause. You need this bullshit cable. You can't update the firmware on the Moonlight without this bullshit cable, and I have no idea where it is. I lost it, and now I can't update the firmware on my Moonlight without plugging in this stupid cable, which makes total sense. Let's just design this damn thing so that the customer can't update the firmware without plugging a cable. What does the cable go to update the firmware? This is why I want to go back into the Matrix. This is why I take whichever pill puts me back in the Matrix, and I eat the steak, and I betray the whole rest of the Prometheus. I just want to eat the steak. I just want to fly my drone. I want to fly my drone. I want to have a good link. I want to see where I'm going, and then I want to land, and I want my shit to not be broken after I crash. And meanwhile, Neo's out there like, I know Kung Fu. I got this cable. I use walk snail. So that's why I haven't tested the Moonlight, because I had to go buy this effing cable and it hasn't come in the mail yet, and so I can't update the firmware on my frickin' Moonlight. It's 6-pin. It's not a JST. It's not a JST. If it was a JST cable, I would have made one. It's not a JST. It's some other bullshit connector that I don't have. So I had to buy it. Thank God they had it at Rotor Riot. Thank you, Rotor Riot. Because I was going to have to pay $20 to have it shipped from China. You have to plug the cable in because the cable connects the video transmitter to the Moonlight module. And they have to have their firmware updated together. Also, you can't just update the video transmitter without the cable and say, just leave the Moonlight firmware out of date. Nope. They have to be updated together, is my understanding. If I'm wrong, that would be fantastic. So we got these two devices. And if the firmware's not up to date, you can't bind them to the goggles. And you need the cable. They need to be connected to update the firmware. But we're not going to do that connection internal to the unit with a little software-based switch that just connects them and lets them talk to each other when they need to. No. We're going to have a fucking cable that you can lose. Oh, I'm so angry about this cable. And it's so typical of how Walksnail does things. That's why people are like, hey, there's this new Walksnail VTX that they're talking about on the Discord. And I'm like, oh, good. Let me know when you can buy one. Because Walksnail teasing a new product that they haven't released. They released this repeater. That's badass. And they didn't tease it. It just came out. Any product that Walksnail teases, you're not going to see. And any product, the actual product they release, you'll be like, oh, that's cool.
You know what? If you just say you're insane. Low RSSI with other Twist Micro with a dry weight of 50 grams. Now, it doesn't come with a battery, but my favourite is this 450 milliamp Tatu 3S LiPo. I did have to retune the model for the heavier battery, although I couldn't seem to hook this one up completely when it came to the tune, regardless of the battery size. It would always, at some point, get prop wash oscillations, and the nose would slightly bob up and down. And even if I mess with the filters or the PIDs, I have a sneaky suspicion that the problem is to do with the frame. They've gone with this cube style frame similar to Diatone for durability, but I think this has sacrificed the flight characteristics. Now, it's not terrible, and I'd actually recommend this model because it's got a really long flight time, and it's going to be super durable for sure. But what I'm getting at is that these models are so light anyways, I'm yet to break a frame in a crash. So if you did manage to break one of these ultralights, then it probably deserved it. Nothing is bulletproof, and you have no idea how spoiled we are that crashing any of these into concrete and them surviving is actually an option compared to planes and Halleys and the things that we were doing just 10 years ago. But on a separate note, this cube design almost permanently got it stuck in a tree. Sadly, I didn't have the DVR going when that happened, but it's worth bearing in mind if you are interested in this model. I'd rather have a nicer flying quad and gone with a more traditional arm layout and just made the arms thicker like on the Gap RC Phantom. And when I think about what the struts on Tiny Whoops do to the flight characteristics and compare it to all of these spars and this extra octagonal mounting plate, it's all deflecting the airflow from the props back through to the props. So I think that's why any setting or PID change or filter isn't fixing these slight wobbles and prop wash oscillations. Now, some people don't like the Avan 2.5-inch props and will put it down to that, but I've got models where they fly absolutely superb with these props, and I really like them. Their website also says that the props that you're going to get is going to be a lottery because Emax aren't providing the props in time. So you might be sent the HQ2525 props, which they have also sent to me. The website says that it supports a 2 to 3S LiPo, 300 to 450 milliamp for a 3S and 450 milliamp for 2S. And the problem with those variations with a quad as light as this is that the PIDs are going to need changing to compensate for the different battery weights, which you could do via the PID profiles, but they haven't done that. They've only given one custom PID profile, which seems to work best with a 300 milliamp LiPo. Anyways, with a 300 milliamp 3S, its all-up weight is 76 grams, and with the Tatu 450 milliamp 3S, it weighs 91 grams. I prefer the 450 milliamp 3S LiPo over the 300 milliamp because, first of all, I was getting over a 5.5 minute flight time, and that was giving it absolute death. And second of all, it actually gained performance despite being heavier, and that's because it's a higher capacity LiPo. Therefore, it can provide more current than the 300 milliamp LiPo. So it took much longer before the 450 milliamp began to sag. You do still get a 4-minute flight time on the 300 milliamp 3S LiPo though, but it was sagging below 10 volts on its first punch out, which isn't healthy for the LiPo. Anyways, let's move on to the rest of the specs, which are almost identical to the Ishin Cinicam. So the motors are an 1103 7000 kV naked bottom motor with silicon wires that connect to the Crazy Bee V3 all-in-one board via JST connectors. I went into greater detail on the V3 board in my review of the Cinicam, so I'll put a card up there so you can go and check that out. But the important changes sensors are 10 amp rated ESCs and a beefed up regulator, so there's no need for an external capacitor. Oh, and don't get the SPI version, get one of the full receiver options, because otherwise the control range is about 80 meters with the SPI receiver. It came flash with Betaflight version 4.04, and other than the PIDs, it was set up identical to the Ishin Cinecan. So again, you can go and watch that video to see what I changed, but to summarize, other than the on-screen display, it needs quite a lot of things changing. The VTX is the best part of this model, which is the Diamond VTX V2. Not only does it have the benefits of smart audio, such as PIT mode, and it switches from 25, 100 and 200 milliwatts through the on-screen display, which is why you need to get one of the full receiver versions, otherwise that is completely wasted. But it also has a built-in DVR that records in 720p 30 at 30 megabits. Now this results in a 16:9 image, and this is a 4:3 camera, but you can edit that in a video editor and could even apply dynamic stretching, which I will be doing later. There is one downside: if you pull the battery without stopping the recording, then it doesn't save the footage, so you have to remember to press this back button once you have landed. The recording starts automatically when you plug in. It does bypass the on-screen display, which I personally like because I always record the DVR through my goggles for the on-screen display information, but I know it's some people's preference to have it on the onboard recorded footage. Either way, I think this is going to be a very popular VTX for micros. They also recently updated the firmware. It used to split the files into 2-minute segments, but mine's come with the latest version, which doesn't split the files. The front button is to change the settings if you don't want to use smart audio, but just use smart audio. In the on-screen display for smart audio, 25 milliwatts is 25 milliwatts. The next one up is 100 milliwatt, and the third one is 200 milliwatt, so it matches up, but don't think that it's outputting 800 milliwatt because it lets you select it. They've just piggybacked off the smart audio technology. If you're still not sure what the power output is set at, then there are some LEDs on the VTX which light up green for 25 milliwatt, blue for 100, and red for 200 milliwatt. The VTX uses a micro UFL connector, which you kind of have to do at this size to get the weight down, and the antenna is a nicely placed sleeve dipole. I believe the canopy has gone through various iterations, with this being the official version. It looks like they've gone for a light but strong plastic, which in sunlight at high throttle does give a little bit of jello through the camera, but it's not that bad. The canopy did come cracked out of the box though, which suggests that there is a little bit too much tension in the side fixture. It's not an integral part of the canopy though, so I don't think it's going to have any effect on the camera itself, and the camera is fixed in solid and not moving at all. Speaking of the camera, it's the Runcam Nano 2, and you can pretty much have it at any camera angle you want. Other than that, you get a battery strap which is far too long for any of the suggested LiPos, so that's going to need to be trimmed down. And they have used this double-sided sticky foam as a cushion for the LiPo. It needs some silicone on there instead, otherwise the LiPo is going to throw pretty easily. You do get a spare canopy along with a screwdriver, some spare screws, nuts, Allen key, as well as a manual, but you'll need to be accustomed to Betaflight to get this one in the air.
Okay, let's go for a punch test. This is a 300 milliamp 3S, and I'm going to try and keep it in as close as possible. This thing is so tiny, it just disappears. Okay, maybe I need to go out a little bit further. Let's try that again. Yeah, so much power for a little model, and you can't hear it at all. Brilliant. this is the Tattoo 450 milliamp 3S. Let's see what the punch is like with this guy. Seems exactly the same to me. And this is 2S, just a try. Now, they recommend 450 milliamp 2S, but I'd actually go bigger. So this is a 650 milliamp 2S. And really, I guess you could tame it with this LiPo, but for me, I'm going to be using this if I'm flying at the indoor sports hall. But let's see how much punch it's got with a 2S. It's actually not that bad. So let's see how it handles acro. Yeah, you can notice the lack of power, but still hovering though. Way below 50% on a 2S.
So this first bit of DVR footage was taken with a Happy Model 300 milliamp 3S LiPo, and it's flying smoothly for now, but watch on a full throttle punch out down to 8 volts 11 seconds in. That is why I am not a fan of this LiPo and prefer the 450 milliamp Tattoo LiPo. Now I'm going to dive the tree here, look at the voltage screaming at me, but also the RSSI in the 30s, and my transmitter is also shouting at me saying RSSI critical, and I told Happy Model about this and they said, oh, it's your transmitter, not realizing that, you know, I've got loads of transmitters and this is not the first time I've experienced low RSSI with other transmitters. So yeah, get the full receiver versions if you're interested in this model. Now the sun came out, so I thought I would see what the jello would be like, and pretty much non-existent, so that was pretty impressive. But did you see there, we started to get a wobble, and that just gets worse throughout the flight, and this is what makes me suspect that it's the frame that is the issue. Again, at the bottom there, we have got prop wash that I was not getting before, and as the LiPo voltage drops, then you can see I'm getting bounce back and things as well, and I wasn't getting that at the start of the LiPo, so I just think there is not enough power to power through all those instructions. Anyways, look at that, 4-minute flight time. So this next flight here, this was done with the 450 milliamp LiPo, and on a full punch out you can see that the voltage hasn't dropped and it's not flashing, so it stayed above 10 volts. I'm still getting some wobbles though, so not quite happy with the tune. I did spend ages trying to get a decent tune out of this, and on any LiPo I couldn't, so I think I'm putting it down to the frame. Maybe I'm being a little bit harsh, but you know, it's a flat, calm day. That's how I knew that something was up, you know. I'm trying everything to get this thing not bobbing and, you know, not doing bounce back and prop wash oscillations and things, and it just wouldn't do it. So, you know, if you know somebody that came up with a good tune that doesn't do this, then, you know, put it in the comments, but I'd be very surprised because I spent a long time trying to not get it to do it, and I just think it's a characteristic of the frame. Now, it's not dreadful, and I've seen much worse. I think I'm just so used to the smooth flying of Betaflight these days, and when something like this crops up on a calm day, then it's really noticeable. But yeah, you know, I did enjoy flying it, I have to say. I like the camera. I think the built-in DVR is superb, but the range, look at that, you know, I'm just halfway through the field and it should not be in the 30s, and you know, it does actually fail safe as well. It's not a case of it going down to 0. If you start to see any lower than 30 on the RSSI, it's going to fall out of the sky, so that's why I'm having to keep it close in. You can see again little wobbles there, and you know, there's a little bit of noise as well filtering through to the video feed. It's not debilitating whatsoever, but I still do think that they need to add a little capacitor on this board. It was the same with the Cinecan, just a couple of lines of noise from the electrical system. But yeah, super long flight time with this, and look at that. It took 2 minutes and 33 seconds until I started getting voltage warnings on a punch out, but there you go, you see 5.5 minute flight time with that one, pretty impressive. Anyways, I took this model along to a much more fun place, I think, especially with the low range. This area is much better suited for this model. There's lots of obstacles to fly around, and I'm going to switch between the DVR footage that it records on board, which I think is very good, but I'm also going to squish it back to 4:3 and then dynamically stretch it, and I think that is a good thing that you can do. RC Shim actually has made a video which is identical to the video that I made, which got taken down because I got a copyright strike. So go over there and watch that video if you want to know how to do dynamic stretching. But I wouldn't be surprised if that video gets taken down, because it is literally a complete copy of what I did with my video, and it got taken down. So hurry up and go and watch that before it does. Anyways, I'll put a link in the description if you wish to get this model, and I'll leave you with some flying. So as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers. Flight time with this, and look at that. It took 2 minutes and 33 seconds until I started getting voltage warnings on a punch. Why I am not a fan of this LiPo and prefer the 450 milliamp tattoo LiPo. Now I'm going to dive the tree here. Look at the voltage screaming at me, but also the RSSI in the 30s, and my transmitter is also shouting at me saying RSSI critical. And I told Happy Model about this, and they said, oh, it's your transmitter, not realizing that, you know, I've got loads of transmitters, and this is not the first time I've experienced low RSSI with other transmitters. So yeah, get the full receiver versions if you're interested in this model. Now the sun came out, so I thought I would see what the jello would be like, and pretty much non-existent, so that was pretty impressive. But did you see there, we started to get a wobble, and that just gets worse throughout the flight, and this is what makes me suspect that it's the frame that is the issue. Again, at the bottom there, we have got prop wash that I was not getting before, and as the LiPo voltage drops, then you can see I'm getting bounce back and things as well, and I wasn't getting that at the start of the LiPo, so I just think there is not enough power to power through all those obstructions. Anyways, look at that, 4 minute flight time. So this next flight here, this was done with the 450 milliamp LiPo, and on a full punch out you can see that the voltage hasn't dropped and it's not flashing, so it stayed above 10 volts. I'm still getting some wobbles though, so not quite happy with the tune. I did spend ages trying to get a decent tune out of this, and on any LiPo I couldn't, so I think I'm putting it down to the frame. Maybe I'm being a little bit harsh, but you know, it's a flat, calm day. That's how I knew that something was up, you know. I'm trying everything to get this thing not bobbing and, you know, not doing bounce back and pot wash oscillations and things, and it just wouldn't do it. So, you know, if you know somebody that came up with a good tune that doesn't do this, then, you know, put it in the comments, but I'd be very surprised because I spent a long time trying to not get it to do it, and I just think it's a characteristic of the frame. Now, it's not dreadful, and I've seen much worse. I think I'm just so used to the smooth flying of Betaflight these days, and when something like this crops up on a calm day, then it's really noticeable. But yeah, you know, I did enjoy flying it, I have to say. I like the camera. I think the built-in DVR is superb, but the range, look at that, you know, I'm just halfway through the field and it should not be in the 30s, and you know, it does actually fail safe as well. It's not a case of it going down to 0. If you start to see any lower than 30 on the RSSI, it's going to fall out of the sky, so that's why I'm having to keep it close in. You can see again little wobbles there, and you know, there's a little bit of noise as well filtering through to the video feed. It's not debilitating whatsoever, but I still do think that they need to add a little capacitor on this board. It was the same with the Cinecan, just a couple of lines of noise from the electrical system. But yeah, super long flight time with this, and look at that. It took 2 minutes and 33 seconds until I started getting voltage warnings on a punch out, but there you go, you see 5.5 minute flight time with that one, pretty impressive. Anyways, I took this model along to a much more fun place, I think, especially with the low range. This area is much better suited for this model. There's lots of obstacles to fly around, and I'm gonna switch between the DVR footage that it records on board, which I think is very good, but I'm also going to squish it back to 4:3 and then dynamically stretch it, and I think that is a good thing that you can do. RC Shim actually has made a video which is identical to the video that I made, which got taken down because I got a copyright strike, so go over there and watch that video if you want to know how to do dynamic stretching. But I wouldn't be surprised if that video gets taken down because it is literally a complete copy of what I did with my video, and it got taken down, so hurry up and go and watch that before it does. Anyways, I'll put a link in the description if you wish to get this model, and I'll leave you with some flying. So as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.
Corner of the room, not ready to resume, 'cause
第9页就是指这个 calibration， 它是指这个摇杆的校正。那有时候我们在用了一阵子以后，发现这个摇杆会偏移，或者是这个左右的这个范围会跑掉的话，那我们可以做一次校正。那或是你新买的一支摇杆，不管是二手还是全新的，也可以拿到后做一次校正，让你确保这个摇杆的这个值从低到高都是在正确的范围。那怎么校正呢？我们进到第9页以后，那这边有写一个 Enter to start， 就是按下那个 Enter 键就开始。那我们先把摇杆这个位置居中，两只摇杆的位置都居中。那我们看一下 Enter， 这个时候它就告诉你说，对，这个就是先把这个摇杆居中，mid point 也是居中的意思。那居中完了，因为它原来可能是在这边，也有可能在底，所以你要按照它这个图。
Welcome back to my RC channel. I'm Andy RC, and today I'm going to be taking a look at the Happy Model Sailfly X. Now, I know this guy has been around for about a month now, and the only reason I haven't checked it out yet is because I got ill, so I'm a little bit behind with my reviews. But I wanted to take a look at this one now, as I've got the Full Speed Toothpick Pro and also the Gep RC Phantom, which are kind of like the next level of this toothpick class, although I'm not sure when you start adding 4S you can put them under the same class anymore. To me, regardless of the genre's name, these models are supposed to be the brushless version of what I was trying to do when I first started the channel, and that was to have an ultralight model with the biggest prop available.
A whole bunch of people are noticing that ever since they switched to Betaflight 4.2, Crossfire RSSI seems like it's reading way lower than it used to. Did Betaflight 4.2 make your Crossfire weaker? Did it make your range less? That's the question we're going to dive into today. And on top of that, what happened to LQ? LQ used to be like 100, 200, 300%, and now it's like a number and a colon and another number. Yeah, Betaflight's made some changes to Crossfire, but they are changes for the better, and we're going to talk all about it. I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're going to learn something.
So it doesn't work with the latest flight configurator. So I thought rather than rolling back on the configurator, I'll see if Happy Model.
I want to start this video by going through the different ways that you can get Crossfire RSSI into your flight controller. And we'll talk about which of those ways is the best, and we will look at whether they produce consistent RSSI results. Why would it matter? Isn't RSSI just RSSI? Shouldn't it be the same number no matter how you get it into the flight controller? Well, that's a very interesting question, and let's figure out if that's actually true. And before Betaflight 4.1, the way to get RSSI into your flight controller was to go into the Crossfire configuration, go into the Nano RX or whatever receiver you've got, and then you would go down to the channel map, and you would set one of your aux channels to be either RSSI, LQ, or RSSI/LQ. After that, you would go into the Betaflight receiver tab, and you would set your RSSI channel to, in this case it's going to be aux4, channel 8, and that will cause Betaflight to read that aux channel as your RSSI, which you can see here is at 100%. And this is the first place where people start to get a little bit misled about what the Crossfire RSSI is actually showing them. So RSSI/LQ means that Crossfire is going to show us a combination of RSSI and LQ link quality. And let's talk about what the difference between those two things is. RSSI is the raw signal strength. If you imagine somebody whispering in your ear versus screaming in your ear, it's just the raw amount of energy that you are getting. And obviously, when it comes to range and control link, more RSSI is better. Link quality refers to, basically it's like the signal to noise ratio. Here's a way of making that sort of make sense. Imagine somebody screaming into your ear, but at the same time, you're like at a super loud rock concert. So even though the fact that they're screaming in your ear, you still can't make out what they're saying. right? That's a case where you have high RSSI, but also a high background noise level, and your signal to noise ratio is bad, and your signal is being corrupted. So, RSSI is the raw signal strength. LQ is the healthiness of the signal, which, if you have higher RSSI, you are going to tend to have a better LQ, but it's not always the case that higher RSSI means high LQ. And on the flip side, and this is going to become way more relevant later in the video as we get to the conclusion, if you have low RSSI but good LQ, you're actually in a pretty good situation. Again, imagine a scenario where you're just in a normal, quiet room, and someone's just talking in a normal speaking voice. Well, your RSSI isn't that great, but you're still having a perfectly fine conversation, your LQ is good, and everything is great. So right now, we're looking at RSSI/LQ, and the reason that was made is that Betaflight doesn't have the ability to have two RSSI channels coming in. Apologies to those in the UK for just flipping you off. Betaflight doesn't have two RSSI aux channels, so if you've got two metrics that you want to monitor, signal strength and LQ, how do you do it? The way that this works, more or less, is that it shows you the most relevant of the two. If RSSI is low but LQ is good, it shows you LQ. And that is why most people who fly using this metric see 99% RSSI all the time. Because most of the time, even as RSSI goes down, your LQ stays pretty good, and you see 99% RSSI. But it's not 99% RSSI, it's 99% LQ. What would happen if we actually switched this from RSSI LQ over to just RSSI? Well, it's still showing 100% RSSI because we're literally just like 10 feet away from each other. Hold on, let me tweak this a little bit. Well, okay, in order to demonstrate this point, I've turned the radio down to 25 milliwatts output power, and I took it outside and I just set it in the front seat of my car. It's only about 20 feet away, but it is through a cinder block wall and, of course, the metal body of my car. What I want you to see is that the RSSI is 60-70%, which might concern you if you're used to seeing 99% RSSI forever. Now, here's why 88% RSSI shouldn't concern you in the slightest. Because RSSI drops off in an inverse, exponential, logarithmic. What happens is that when you are very, very close together, you have very high RSSI. And as you move apart, the RSSI drops off really quickly at first. You'll only see like 85, 90, 99% RSSI practically when the two antennas are touching. With Crossfire, with 900 megahertz and 250 milliwatts output power, you'll see it a little further. But if you ever look at like your 2.4 gigahertz FreeSky systems, you'll never see 99% RSSI unless they're like right up against each other. But as you get further and further away, that drop-off flattens out. So you move 15 or 20 feet away and it goes down to 85% RSSI. And you're like, well, this is nothing. I lost 15% of my RSSI and I only went 20 feet. But then as you get further and further away, it plateaus. And you go a kilometer and you're at like negative 70 or 70%. And you go 2 kilometers and you're at like 65%. You're like, oh, that's pretty good. That's not so bad. So RSSI is really misleading unless you've worked with decibels and RF signals before, because it drops off really quickly when you're close up and then it slows down as you get further away. And if you're expecting to see 99% RSSI forever, that's just not going to happen. Physics won't allow that to happen. And that's one of the takeaways from this video. You never had 99% RSSI forever. You were probably just looking at LQ, and you can have 99% LQ for a really long way. Now I'm going to go back to the receiver tab, and I'm going to turn off this RSSI channel, because Betaflight 4.2 added the ability to read... Shush now. Because Betaflight 4.2 added the ability to read the RSSI and the LQ directly from the Crossfire telemetry. So if we go to the OSD tab, here in the lower right is my RSSI percent, which is the thing that I've always been looking at in the past. But I can go over here on the left and scroll down, and I can turn on the RSSI dBm value and the link quality parameter. There they are in the middle of the screen. The first thing I notice when I go to this new method of getting RSSI is that the RSSI value has changed. If we look in the lower right-hand corner of the screen at the RSSI percent, this should be the same number, whether we're getting it directly from Crossfire telemetry or whether we're getting it from the receiver via an RSSI aux channel, and it isn't. Here we can see we're in the same room. It's reading 64%, whereas I had to take the freaking thing out to my car and put it in the car to get the RSSI to go below 99% using the other method. So something's different, but I have no idea what it is. The other thing that's different is we have two new values here, the LQ and the RSSI dBm. RSSI dBm is confusing to non-RF professionals because dBm start at like 20 and they count downwards to like -70, -80. So it's a really weird scale. So when we see here a value of -43, that's actually a really strong signal. We would typically, I don't know Crossfire's receive sensitivity, but for a typical RF device like a Wi-Fi device, you would start to see signal loss around -70 to maybe -90 dBm. -40 is pretty strong. So this dBm scale running from +20 to like minus something, that's confusing and might not be what you expect. But it is better to see dBm, the actual signal strength, instead of this weird percent value that who knows what it's like, how you convert dBm to percent. Since they don't really know the ends of the scale, it's a little hard to reliably do that. And that may be why we're getting different percent values down here, depending on which way we get the value into the flight controller. The other thing that's changed is the LQ value, and the LQ value used to read from 0 to 300%, and here's how it breaks down. Crossfire has three what they call RF modes. In RF mode number 2, you are running at 150 hertz. That is the fastest, lowest latency mode, but RF mode 2 only happens when you're relatively close to the Crossfire transmitter. The exact distance varies depending on how much output power you have and various other factors. RF mode number 1 has 50 hertz sampling, so it's higher latency, but it's much, much more reliable. And then RF mode 0 is 4 hertz. Basically, it's just barely hanging on when it's in RF mode 0, and you are really about to lose. You're just about to fail safe. The way that LQ used to work is from 0 to 100% was RF mode 0. So you basically never wanted to see LQ below 100%. From 100% to 200% was RF mode 1, that's 50 hertz mode. And from 200% to 300% was RF mode 2, that's the 150 hertz mode. The way it works now is that they're just showing you the RF mode, which in this case is 2, and the link quality, which in this case is 100. So that would equate to 300 in the old way. If we saw RF mode 1 and LQ of 100, that would equate to 200 in the old way, and so on. So how do you interpret these numbers? What is the final takeaway here? The final takeaway is that you should be paying attention to LQ most of all. I don't know why the RSSI percent is different in Betaflight 4.2, where you're reading directly from the receiver versus using the aux channel. I don't know what failsafe, at what dBm will Crossfire failsafe? It's not -40, is it -60, 70, 80? I don't care. Because at the end of the day, as long as my LQ is good, I am pretty much good to go, and I know I'm not going to fail safe. So my suggestion is turn off the RSSI. Just look at the LQ. And what is a good or a bad LQ? The advice is the same as it always was. As long as you are in RF mode 2, don't worry about LQ or RSSI. Your link is wonderful. If you fail down from RF mode 2 to RF mode 1, now start paying attention to your LQ. And as long as the LQ is above about 70%, you're still fine. If your LQ is down around 70% in mode 1, or if your LQ ever goes to mode 0, you need to start thinking about turning around. But as long as your LQ is above about, let's say, 80% in mode 1, you are good. Another thing to keep in mind is that some people are going into their receiver config and they are manually setting their RF profile to 150 hertz.
I was
the default is
extreme oscillations
to have it on
specifically in
dynamic,
return,
which means it'll
but
switch between
also
150
in a
hertz
straight
and 50
line
hertz
as
as
well.
it
So
needs be.
should
If
they
you
have
manually set this to
died on
150
4.02,
hertz, you will
it's just
always
not
have
working
the lowest
for
possible
this model.
latency
We
and the
don't
most
have any jello in
consistent
the picture. It's
latency,
pretty nice.
which
The
helps
camera
Betaflight
is nice, but
have
that's
smoother
irrelevant because
motors and
watch,
so forth.
I get
But
a full
you will
plunge out
not have the ability
and
to
the
fail
picture
safe
tumbles
from
out
mode
of the
2
sky.
down to mode
Now,
1.
I assume
You will
that
simply
just
go
like
from
all
mode
the
2
other
to
reports,
no link at
that
all.
the
So
board
if
has
you've done that,
failed
then
and it
you
has
just need to be
blown.
looking
But
at mode
when
2
I
with an
eventually got
LQ
to the
bit greater
model,
than
that
about
wasn't the
80%.
case.
When it starts getting
There
around
were
70%,
3 props
you're
missing,
starting to be in trouble.
and they weren't
That's
in the
going to do it
vicinity of the
for
model.
this
I never found them.
video.
So in that
I
full
hope this
throttle
video has
punch
helped
out,
clear up
3
what is
of
one of the
propellers flew
the
off
weirdest and most
because
pressing
of
questions
the
people have
high
had about
RPMs. Now,
Crossfire,
I'll tell you,
which
these
is,
props
number
are
one,
tension
why
fitted,
is the
and you
RSSI
cannot
not
bring them
99% forever? And number
hands.
two,
That's why
why
they
is the
have
RSSI
installed
different
prop
between
remover
the...
that further validates that these
This
props
is the
are
Crop
being
35
pushed
HT0,
past
and what's
what
really
they
cool about
were
it,
originally designed for. So you can say, yeah, they're coming out with stiffer props. Well, are they going to add glue to them? Because if they come out with stiffer props, that's only going to give more thrust, and then they are just going to fly off even easier. However, I was glad that the flight controller hadn't blown.
So, in the name of science, let's see what a 300 milliamp 2S is like in terms of punch. So, okay, I'm going to try and get it close, and let's go full throttle. Now, there's not as much punch there, but that vibration noise has definitely gone away. And that is the noise I would expect from a model. I really do think, the 3S is pushing these props past what they are designed for. And, I wouldn't say that it was sluggish on 2S. There's plenty of power there, and it's not vibrating or anything like that. It's acting nicely, very similar to how I found the toothpick from Full Speed. Yeah, you could definitely see that there was a bit more power there, but the trade-off was that it didn't fly very nice. And you also got a bunch of jello as well. Although I have to say, with that one, you got jello on 2S because the camera wasn't mounted very nicely. Anyways, to see how they behave through the goggles.
So this is some DVR footage. I've skipped around about a minute in because I actually got a pretty decent flight time out of this 300 milliamp 2S GMB LiPo. And there was less power, but, none of the props flew off. I think as well with this one, it's got such an extreme camera angle that when you give it throttle, it moves forward more than it gains in height when you're looking through the goggles. But can I recommend this model? I don't think I can, Look at me trying to do a inverted yaw spin. That's how extreme the camera angle is, so it might be maybe 45 to 50 degrees. So I have a couple of goes at trying to get an inverted yaw spin, but you can see just not quite managing it there. I think the positive I'll take away from this model is that the camera's actually really decent. But yeah, when I put the 2S LiPo on there, it was a particularly windy day, so I think a combination of the model being a lot lighter now and it getting pushed around a lot by the wind, it was definitely causing some buffeting. So either the tuner's gone in the opposite direction, I certainly couldn't hear any oscillations from this point, but maybe it had gone in the opposite direction. Either way, the tune not working for a 3S LiPo or a 2S LiPo. So yeah, it's a difficult one for me to recommend, and you know, there are a lot of models out there, and as I mentioned earlier, there are others coming, so I'll have to leave it to you to decide. I mean, you know, it's a pretty decent price. Doing a bit of a range test here. Check out the RSSI. It goes into the 30s, so you're talking about 100 meters with this one of range. And you can see though, you know, we are 3 minutes in there, and yeah, I think it was 4 minutes, and I actually brought it in, and it just started to flash with the voltage warning. So decent flight time, very similar experience to what I got with the full speed toothpick on 2S. So yeah, not as much power, but you know, the props aren't vibrating like crazy, and in the case of this model, flying off. I mean, I really did try and remove a prop with my hand, and I couldn't do it. In fact, what was happening is the frame started to bend, and the motors started to feel like the screws would strip when I tried to pull the props off. So that's how much force was given to rip 3 props off on 3S, but I don't know, maybe not everybody is flying these things at full throttle like I was. Anyways, I'm trying to come in for a landing there because we're at 4 minutes. And if you are interested in this model, I'll link it in the below. So as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers. Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I'm Andy RC, and today I'm going to be checking out the Emax Tiny Hawk Freestyle. Emax seem to be knocking out models left, right and centre at the moment, and just when I think they have everything covered, they come up with this, which is essentially the main guts of the recently released 2S Tiny Hawk S, with the motors beefed up and the protectors removed in place of a carbon fibre freestyle frame. Now, the original Tiny Hawk suits both experienced and beginner pilots, being able to fly indoors in tight spaces without the worry of the walls in your house getting brand new paintwork slashed by the propellers. But the original Tiny Hawk is a perfect platform.
Siendo que se manda, porque no me aguanto la demanda, como si vienes.
If you've got Crossfire or Tracer and you've got DJI, then you've got a problem. Because the DJI goggles are not capable of showing link quality, LQ, in their on-screen display. They can show signal strength, RSSI, But RSSI is actually not the metric that you need to be concerned about if you're concerned about how far can I fly and am I about to failsafe. LQ is actually what you want. So today I'm going to show you a workaround that lets you put LQ into the DJI goggles. I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're going to learn something today. In a previous video, I showed you how the Betaflight OSD can now read LQ and RSSI directly from the Crossfire telemetry. You don't need to do any kind of weird aux channel workaround hacks like you used to. You can just go into the OSD tab and you can find link quality. Where's it at? There it is. Link quality. You turn it on and it appears on screen. And it actually shows the RF mode. That is whether you're in 150 hertz or 50 hertz mode, and the link quality from 0 to 99 hertz to 0 to 100%. But DJI doesn't support that. So in order to get LQ into the OSD of the DJI goggles, we actually have to go back to the old way that we did it. And if you've done it before, if I say use the aux channel method to put LQ into the flight controller as RSSI, and then have the DJI goggles show RSSI, but the RSSI is really LQ and Bob's your uncle, well, for about 4% of you, you don't even need to watch the rest of the video. For everybody else who didn't follow along with that, let's do it step by step. The first thing I'm going to need to do is plug in a Crossfire receiver. You're going to need the receiver on and bound in order to set this up. Then in my radio, I'm going to go into the Crossfire configuration Lewis script menu, and I'm going to go to the Nano RX or whatever receiver you're using. Probably the Nano RX, right? And I'm going to go down to the output map, and not this output map, actually, no, the channel map. I always get the names of those mixed up. We're going to go to the channel map. We're going to set one of our output channels to output RSSI, or actually what we're going to do is LQ, not RSSI. If you want to know why I keep saying that LQ is the thing to care about and not RSSI, I've got another video about why in Betaflight 4.2, Crossfire's RSSI doesn't seem to read as high as it used to. Why did Betaflight 4.2 make the RSSI go down? Is it a bug? What should you do about it? I'll put a link to that in the video description down below. You can check that out when you're done with this one. So I like to use channel 8, and this does mean you're going to give up one of your 8 channels. So be it. I'm going to click, and I'm going to set that to output LQ. And there, you can also have it output LQ/RSSI, which is kind of like the worst of the two. Whichever of the two is worst, you get it. But it can be a little confusing. And I think you should just set it to LQ, because LQ is the thing you really need to care about. So we're going to set the receiver to output LQ on channel 8. And as a reminder, that is being set up in the receiver, so that's going to work for just this one quad. And you're going to need to do this on all of the quads that you want to do this on. Okay, having done that, let's go to the receiver tab, and we should see now that aux4 channel 8 is at a value of 2000, the maximum possible value. That means we're outputting the maximum possible LQ, and it seems like it's working. And if I just kind of put my hand over the antenna just a little, well, frankly, we're so close here, it's just going to read 100% all the time, but that is correctly working. The next thing I'm going to need to do is go over here to the right side of the receiver tab, where we have the RSSI channel. We're going to set that RSSI channel to be aux4, which is channel 8. aux4 is what I set to read the LQ, and we're going to hit save. There's one other thing you should check if you're going to do this. You should go to the configuration tab, and you should make sure that the option RSSI ADC is disabled. The next thing we need to do is go to the OSD tab and turn on RSSI. And actually, if you look right here at this is my default OSD setup for my DJI quads. Actually, this is for the DJI quads with GPS. So since this quad doesn't have GPS, we can just turn off all the GPS related things. And that's pretty much how things usually look for me. Yeah, perfect. And you can see I've got RSSI set up here. I've got average cell voltage and a few other things. I'll put a copy of my OSD setup in the video description as well. And if you want to copy this, I use this on all my DJI quads, and I think it works pretty well. It lines up really well with the existing OSD elements. Anyway, whatever. But you can see I've got RSSI here. I've got it turned on, and RSSI value. This is the OSD element, and that is now going to be showing us LQ, not RSSI. Now at this point, you should be able to see RSSI in your DJI goggles. If you don't, then do you have your OSD working at all? Setting up the OSD is a topic for another video, but suffice it to say, you need the TX and the RX wires, the white and the gray wires from the air unit, or on the Vista, it's whatever color wires you use, you just solder them on. The TX and the RX wires from the DJI unit need to go to the RX and the TX pads of a UART on your flight controller, and then here in the ports tab, you need to enable the MSP column for that UART, and that gets the OSD working. The other thing you need to do is turn on the custom OSD option in your goggles, as you see here. So at this point, you see the RSSI in the goggles, but in fact, the RSSI is actually LQ. It's actually link quality. Now, just so I don't have to keep holding a GoPro in the goggles while I'm trying to make this video, instead of looking in the goggles, we're going to look here at the setup screen, and we're just going to look at the RSSI here, because how does that RSSI translate to link quality? Link quality has two components. One is the RF mode, which is whether you are in short range, low latency 150 hertz, or as you fly further away, it drops from 150 hertz down to 50 hertz, and then gives you just gobs and gobs of range at slightly higher latency. Well, if you've got the LQ in the OSD, then it just shows you RF mode 1, link quality 100. But it doesn't work like that when you've got RSSI. Here's how it does work. I'm going to go into the Crossfire Configure menu and go into the Nano RX, and you should see that I have it set to RF profile 150 hertz. I do this for all my freestyle quads. I lock them to 150 hertz, and although this reduces the range from forever to more than I ever need, it gives me consistent low latency. That means that the RF mode on this quad is always going to be RF mode 2. See, what I was expecting it to do was, like, when it's in 150 hertz mode, it's from like 90 to 100%. And then when it's in 50 hertz mode, it's from like 80 to 90% or something. But it just stayed at 100%. I wonder if it's smart enough to know that it's locked at 50 hertz. And so there's no point in doing, it's just how much is your LQ? There's no RF mode. I wonder if I set this to RF mode dynamic, then will it do the thing I'm trying to demonstrate? So in dynamic RF mode, it'll start out in 150 hertz, but then when the quad gets further away and it drops to 50 hertz, let's see what happens. Here, let's go to the telemetry screen, and we can find the RF mode. There it is, RF mode 2, and okay, let's go. Even though I've got this set at 25 milliwatts, it's not going to go to RF mode 1 anywhere in my house, so we're going to have to go to some extreme measures to get it. This is my go-to, is to go to my car, and I put it in my car. It's a big metal cage and cinder block walls. Crap, that didn't work. Okay, hang on. Maybe if I just like go upstairs, get a couple floors of the house between us. Okay, surely that's gonna force RF mode 1, right? Or even failsafe. Oh, there it is. Got it. I just had to wiggle the antenna a little bit. Okay, let's go downstairs and see what the RSSI is doing. The reason I've been doing all this work to figure out how the LQ works is I want to be able to tell you what LQ value is the value where you know that you need to turn around and come home because you're about to fail safe. And it turns out that the answer to that question depends on whether you are using dynamic profile or fixed 150 hertz profile. So, if you're using dynamic profile, which is the default that Crossfire ships with, that means that you'll be in 150 hertz mode 2 when you're close to yourself, and then as you fly further away, it'll fail over to mode 1, and In that case, anytime you are in mode 2, the RSSI will read 99%. Basically, since Crossfire knows that it can fail over to mode 1, it knows you're nowhere near a failsafe, and it just stays at 99%. Then, as it goes into mode 1 and the LQ continues to drop, the RSSI begins to drop, and the threshold that you need to be aware of is 80%. Somewhere between above 80%, you're fine. Somewhere between 80 and 70%, you're probably going to fail safe. And if you're below 70%, I don't know how you're still in the air. Okay, so 80% is the threshold when you're in dynamic profile, which is the default profile that Crossfire ships with. If you are locked at 50 hertz, which I don't know why you would ever do that, but if you chose to do that, the device is the same. At 80%, that's when you should start thinking about turning around. If you're like me and you lock your radio to 150 hertz mode 2, then the advice is a little different. The link quality threshold where you need to think about turning around is like 30-35%. It can go way lower. When you're in dynamic mode, it actually switches to RF mode 1 around 70-80% because it's just like, screw it, why push it? But if you lock it to 150 hertz, it has no choice and you can just keep going. But it's really important that you know that if you are locked in mode 2, you don't have to turn around at 70 or 80%. You can keep going much further than that. And the reason that's important is if you're locked in mode 2, it will drop off way faster than if you're in mode 1. And so if you were turning around at 80% LQ, you would have like no range and you'd be like, what is up? You go way further, down to about 30, maybe 40% LQ if you're locked in mode 2. Before we finish up, there's one other thing you should do, and that involves the failsafe settings. Here in the failsafe tab, go to the channel fallback settings, find your aux channel that you're using for RSSI, or LQ really, but Betaflight thinks it's RSSI, and change that from hold to set, and change the set value to 1000, and save and reboot. What that's going to do is when you failsafe, not that you're ever going to failsafe because Crossfire never failsafes, but if you somehow manage to failsafe, the default behavior of Betaflight is to hold the aux channel at its previous value, which will mean that while you're failsafing and your quad's falling out of the air, the RSSI will say 70% or whatever the last thing it said was. What this does is it causes the channel to go to 1000, the lowest possible value of the channel, which means that when you failsafe or when your quad is unplugged, the RSSI will read 0%, which is what you would expect. And that's going to bring us to the end of the video. Now you know everything you need to know to use LQ in your DJI goggles. I really appreciate you watching all the way to the end of the video. YouTube loves that. And if you love this content, I'd like to remind you that I do have a Patreon. It's a very simple way for you to support me and the work that I do by paying as little as $2 a month. That's my lowest Patreon tier, $2 a month. There's a link in the video description to sign up. $2 a month. Forget about it. It's a small amount for you, hopefully, but it really does add up. It really matters a lot to me. So that's my plug for this video. I'll put a link to some more Crossfire videos down in the video description if you're not convinced yet. Thanks for watching. Happy flying.
Okay, so today we're checking out the new AMAX Performante 1303 motor. This here happens to be the 7500 kV version. I've got the 5000 kV version installed here on this toothpick. And this is actually a rebuild of the Food Spartan that I have a video I did like maybe like earlier this week, I think, or maybe a week ago. Depends on when I released the video. It was based on this frame here, and it was using 65 millimeters or 250 propellers. And you can check out that video if you want. But essentially, I just did frame transfer. I did have to move the video transmitter up from the bottom. So in this frame here, the video transmitter was in this LQ part here, and then it was in this layer here just by the battery. And so on the frame I used, which is a baby tooth frame, you've seen before on my channel. I just use this frame, and then I move the video transmitter from the bottom. You can see the wires right there. Instead of it going under the flight controller, it's going on top of the flight controller. And you can see it's right there, between the flight controller and the canopy. The receiver is actually above the VTX. And in order to accommodate for that spacing there for the VTX to go, I added these 2mm spacers that use up this screw space here that was previously used by the 3D printed part for the VTX. GTX was held before, and that was it. I didn't use any new parts. Other than that, I just got these spacers, moved the VTX to the top. I obviously desoldered all the motors, and not using those props anymore, so these 1106 motors are now gone and desoldered. And I just soldered on the 1303 motors right there. Very, very easy. And it literally took 10 minutes to put this new model together. And you can see here on the frame. I posted a bunch of these photos to my Instagram, so if you want to see closer images, details of what the motor looks like, go check out the Instagram, but here it is again. If you want to see the windings and everything. 2mm shaft, so you only need the jump down props with 2mm holes for the shaft. And this has a M2 set screw at the bottom instead of a C-clip, so pretty light actually compared to the T-Motor 1303 motors that I reviewed like a couple weeks ago. I think that they're, if I remember right, by gram, a little over a gram lighter than the T-Motor version. So I'm saving like 4 to 6 grams of weight in total in using this 1303 over the T-Motor 1303. And then comparatively in terms of the weight, let me just show you. So this is the traditional kebab toothpick, your TP3 using the FPV Cycle 1303 5000 kV motors. I don't remember the exact weight of this. I'll stick it up on the screen here if I'll go look it up, but I think this is still heavier than the AMAX motor. But then this overall build here, this is everything with the receiver and props and all together. And this is coming in at 62.3 grams. And then my little frame transfer build here with the AMAX motors is coming in at 56.4 grams. So it's actually a fair amount lighter. It's probably because I'm using a unibody frame instead of the TP3 frame with the extra screws and stuff here, as you can see in the arms. So that's probably a big difference. The motors are probably heavier. I'm using FX and plus receiver in this one. Or the camera is heavier on this one. I think there's an Nano 2 camera here and a much heavier canopy. So if I use the same canopy here and this camera, probably could shave another 5 grams off of this one, so it'd be closer to 50 grams. Let's see. I might try that. If you guys are interested in that kind of video, let me know. I could make this even later and see if the performance is even faster. It's already pretty fast. This setup is actually pretty impressive compared to the T-Motor and even the FPV Cycle. The motor has a lot of kick, at least based on the previous testing I've done on other 1303 motors. But yeah, let's get right to the narrated flight footage. You guys can check out the link, the pricing on the motor and the specs. I think overall it's a nice light motor. I think the way that they have designed this bell, I think some people were joking that it kind of looks like a beer keg.
Hi there everyone. If you're interested in micros, sub 250 grams or 3-inch racing, this video is going to be for you, because we are going to be testing 15 different 1404 motors from the likes of Beta FPV, Brother Hobby, Emax, Flyfish, Happy Model, Holybro, iFlight, MEPS, Skystars, SpeedyBeat, TBS and T-Motor, and seeing which of these motors performs the best and which gives the best value for money for your next 3-inch build. It's a heap to cover in one video, so let's not waste the best value and T-Motor.
TBS, SpeedyBeat, Skystars,
and see which of these motors.
So here's a quick review on these brand new AMAX ET1103 7500 kV motors. Absolutely beautifully over-engineered motors. How notchy are they, Ryder?
Notchy, notchy.
Will kind of sort of stutter in beta flight.
What?
Yep, you're spin this motor. You feel it sticky. So yeah, put that one on there. Wouldn't spin up in Betaflight. Kind of did, sort of didn't. I'm like, okay, good thing I ordered 5 motors, right?
Input.
So I put the spare motor on, right?
Yep.
Went out, tried to fly a battery. One bounced into a sliding glass door. Got a little ding in this motor. It would still kind of fly.
Wait, so
Put it into the fence.
you took it off and it just slammed straight into the door.
Now I did something dumb. I bounced off the ground, spun out of control, and slammed into the sliding glass door.
Okay?
It was a pretty hard hit,
Mm-hmm.
but we've done worse.
Okay.
I was a little nervous. I looked at the sliding glass door, making sure it wasn't broken. So that was like battery 1. Battery 2, I'm like, well, let me see if it's still flying. Flip a ghost branch, go into the metal fence.
Oh gosh.
And guess what?
What?
Try and turn that motor back there.
That seems unflappable.
Unflappable.
So we're dead, basically.
We're dead.
We're basically dead.
We're dead.
We're dead.
Good. So that's a review of AMAX AT1103 7,500 kV motors. 1 dead on arrival.
Yep.
1 dead after 2 packs.
So we're basically gonna have to buy a whole new set of these.
Ask AMAX, see if they'll replace the one that came dead. I mean, the one I killed is my fault, but so these AT1103s are brand new, but they've got a 1303 version.
Mm-hmm.
And I was seeing on Facebook that a lot of people were breaking the shafts on the 1303.
So basically, it's just real good.
Performs the best and which gives the best value for money for your next 3-inch build. It's a heap to cover in one video, so let's not waste any more time. Let's dive right into it. Before we dive into the test results, I want to show you all of the motors and take you through the preparations that I've made for this testing. Starting with the motor wires. All of the motors have had their wires cut to exactly 3 inches long, so they're on a level playing field in terms of motor weight and also the resistance of the motor wires. Now, taking that into account, some of the motors, like this Holybro motor, have very thin wires, and other motors, like this TBS Pod Racer, have very thick wires. And that will make a difference to the weight and also to the resistance, but I think keeping all the wires to the same length is the fair test here. All of the motors are tested using the same prop, and it's this HQ T3x3x3. And the reason that I've chosen this prop is that it's one of the best performing props that I've tested for 3-inch drones, and it performs really well across the board. So it's what I would recommend for typical freestyle 3-inch flying, and I think it's a great prop to put all of these motors through their paces and see how they perform compared to each other. Alright, so now it's time to take a look at the test results. And we're going to start by looking at the KV of the motor. I measure KV by running the motor full throttle with no prop at 7 volts, and then measuring the RPM that the motor achieves using an optical tape, and dividing that RPM by 7 to give the KV in RPM per volt. Looking now at the results, we can see the rated KV in dark blue and the measured KV in light blue. And ideally, we'd like the measured KV to be similar to the rated KV. When there's a large discrepancy between rated and measured KV, it can lead to some pretty weird things. Like you might buy a Holybro Ripper 3800 kV motor and think, oh, that's great, that's the right throttle response that I like, and not realise that that motor is actually more like 3500 kV in reality. And then you go and buy another 3800 kV motor because that's the kV that you like. You buy it from Beta FPV, and that motor's got a kV of 3770. And that's a 10% difference between two motors that should have the same kV. And that's going to give you a different throttle response, give you a different feel. It's not going to help you to pick the right motor. So this chart shows you the measured KV in light blue, and you can see the motors that actually have a similar KV to each other, even though they might have something different written on them. If you enjoy independent scientific test data like this, please consider supporting the channel, either directly through my Patreon or indirectly using affiliate links. If you're about to make an Amazon purchase, why not click through on my Amazon affiliate link down in the video description. It won't cost you anything. Amazon will make a little bit less profit off you, and Jeff Bezos will send a few dollars my way to help support more great videos like this. And let's face it, he can probably spare those few dollars, and I would sure appreciate it. Now it's time to look at the thrust and efficiency of these motors. I measure this using an HQT 3x3x3 test prop, and we're doing a throttle ramp from 0 to 100% throttle at 16 volts. I'm measuring the RPM of the motor, the thrust, the torque that it's producing, and also all of the electrical parameters like voltage, current and power. From all this data, we can look at not only the thrust of the motor, but also its efficiency over the whole throttle range. Let's start by looking at the thrust versus throttle curves. We've got throttle on the x-axis and thrust on the y-axis. I want to call your attention to a feature that I think is a real risk with these smaller 1404 size motors, and that is insufficient torque for the kV of the motor. You can see that some of these curves, particularly the ones higher up, have this phenomenon where they sort of flatten out at high throttle. This is caused by the motor running out of torque. It would like to drive to a higher RPM, but it doesn't have the torque to spin the prop that fast, and so the thrust versus throttle curve sort of flattens out, and you don't get much increase in thrust for more throttle. This is a real problem for a couple of reasons. The first is motor heating. You can see that we're putting more power in because the throttle setting is higher, but we're not getting commensurately more thrust. We're not getting more power out of the motor. That means the motor efficiency is falling off really badly, and all of that wasted energy that's not going into the prop is going into heating up the motor. And that risks the motor getting really hot and smoking. So that's problem number one. The second problem is low throttle control. I picked three motors to show this: the Flyfish Flash 1404 4500 kV, the iFlight Zing 1504 3900 kV, and the SkyStars 1404 3800 kV. We can see that at low throttle, the Flyfish Flash has the steepest curve, and that means it has the worst low throttle control. A small movement of the throttle stick leads to a big change in thrust, and that's hard to control at low throttle. Looking at the higher throttle part of the curve, you can see that the Flyfish Flash starts to sort of flatten out at high throttle and doesn't end up delivering any more thrust, really, than the SkyStars 1404 3800 kV. So that SkyStars motor has much better low throttle control because it's got a much shallower curve at low throttle, and it produces about the same top end power. So you can see that with the 4500 kV motor, we've sacrificed low throttle control and we've not gained anything. Compare that to a slightly larger motor, the Zing 1504 3900 kV. That again has better low throttle control than the Flyfish Flash, but because it's a bigger motor and can deliver more torque, it doesn't flatten out at high throttle, and so it delivers much more top end. So you need to find the right balance when you're picking a motor. You need to find one that has enough kV to give you good top end performance, but you don't want to sacrifice low throttle control for no benefit, so that motor also needs to be able to deliver enough torque to match that kV. Alright, so with all of that context, let me run you through this maximum thrust chart. Starting at the top, iFlight Zing 1504 3900 kV, lovely shaped thrust throttle curve, loads of performance, over 400 grams on this test. It's a bit of a bigger stator size and a bit of a heavier motor though, so maybe not ideal if you're worried about weight. T-Motor F1404 4600 kV. This motor does flatten off a bit at the top. You are going to want to use a bit of throttle expo to try and get a bit of low throttle control back, but my goodness, it produces a lot of performance for its size and weight. It gets pretty hot doing it as well, so that's something to be aware of. This motor does get pretty toasty if you're high in the throttle a lot of the time. Then we've got the Speedy Bee, the Flyfish Flash, and the Beta FPV. All of these have a really significant flattening of the thrust throttle curve at the top end. Not such good low throttle control. I would probably move past them and look at the SkyStars 1404 3800 kV. Lovely shaped thrust throttle curve, plenty of performance, over 350 grams in this test, so that's a real sweet spot motor for my money. Then we have the TVS Pod Racer, a bit of a bigger stator size, 1505. I would have hoped for a bit more performance for that extra size. The Beta FPV 1404 3800, that again flattens off at the top, even though it's only 3800 kV. You're going to lose a bit of efficiency. It gets pretty hot. I'd probably move past that one. And then we've got a whole stack, you know, from Holybro, Emax, Brother Hobby, iFlight, Happy Model, and MEPS. Happy Model and MEPS, those two motors right at the bottom, are quite efficient motors. We'll come on to that in a second, but not so good on performance. And that other group of motors, from the iFlight up to the Holybro, you're going to be buying those based on value. They're not super high performance motors, but if they're cheap and available where you are, they might be a good choice for you. Now let's move on and look at efficiency. For efficiency, we're going to start by looking at the efficiency versus the mechanical power. The mechanical power on the x-axis and the efficiency on the y-axis, with efficiency calculated as mechanical power out divided by electrical power in. We can see that around 50 watts of mechanical power out, we've got efficiencies ranging from 65 up to 73%. And that's a big range. That's going to be noticeable even on a shorter sort of 3-minute flight, as giving you a few more seconds in the air. And you can see that these curves do cross over each other a little bit, but if we pick a point, let's say 50 watts, which is sort of in the middle of these motors' power band where they're all pretty efficient, you can see that the curves do sort of stack up. So let's take a look at a bar chart and run through that to see how these motors compare against each other. At the top, we've got the Happy model 1404 and the TBS Pod Racer 1505. This isn't surprising to me because these have among the lowest KVs of all the motors that I've tested. A low KV motor is always going to be more efficient than a high KV motor, all else equal. Then we have the SkyStars 1404 3800 KV. This motor did really well in the thrust test and is pretty efficient. So SkyStars have managed to strike the perfect balance here, and this motor is doing really, really well. Then we have the Zing 1504, really powerful motor and also quite efficient. We have the MEPS 1404 2900 KV. With the KV that low, it should be a bit higher up the efficiency chart in my opinion. The T-Motor F1404 4600 kV, over 70% efficient, and it's bananas powerful. So T-Motor are doing a really good job here, somehow making a motor that can be both efficient and super powerful. Then we have a bit of a step down, and we have Flyfish Flash, Emax Eco, Holybro Ripper, Speedy B. These are all motors that are less efficient. If you're concerned about efficiency, you're going to be wanting to pick motors higher up on this chart. The motors are a bit lower down. You're either going to pick them because they're good price and available, or because you're not so concerned about efficiency. With thrust and efficiency taken care of, it's time to talk about torque. I measure the torque that each motor is able to generate using an inertial flywheel dyno test. I take a flywheel of a known inertia, 50 kg/mm squared, and accelerate it from 5,000 to 20,000 RPM using each of the motors at 50% throttle, driven off of 16 volts. This gives us a measure of two things. One, the maximum torque that the motor is able to generate, which is a measure of its magnetic performance, and also the torque versus RPM curve to see how the torque of the motor decreases with increasing RPM. The torque RPM curves are my favourite chart. If I could only have one chart to judge motors on, it would be this one. I've got motor RPM on the x-axis, torque on the y-axis in Newton meters, and we're looking for two things. The peak of the torque RPM curve, so where the motor is generating the maximum amount of torque, and also the slope of that curve as it falls away, because that's another measure of KV. And what we can see is that the Zing 1504 is doing really well. It's a bit of a bigger motor, a bit of a heavier motor, bigger stator size, but it's producing nearly 0.04 Newton meters of torque. It's doing really, really well. And it falls off nicely with increasing RPM, as we would expect with 3,900 kV. Then we have the SkyStars 1404. This is a little gem of a motor. Great thrust, great efficiency, and it's got a beautiful torque RPM curve. You couldn't ask for more from this motor. 0.035 Newton meters on a 1404. The Emax Eco is also doing well. Nearly as much torque as the SkyStars motor, but it falls off more quickly with RPM. This Emax Eco would do a lot better if it actually had 3,700 kV. That's what's written on it, but it has more like 3,400 kV. That means the torque falls off with RPM a lot faster than you'd expect, given what's printed on it. If it had higher kV, it would do a lot better in this test. Then we have the Happy model. That's got decent peak torque, but falls off very quickly again because that kV is quite low. And then we have some motors with poorer magnetic design. They produce less torque overall. And we have these very high kV motors. A high kV motor will struggle to generate torque at low RPMs because it just can't draw enough current to produce the torque, the maximum torque that it's able to at those low RPMs because of the resistance of the wires, the resistance of the windings. But at those higher RPMs, because it's got higher kV, the torque doesn't fall off so quickly. So those higher kV motors producing more torque once you get up to 15,000 RPM or more, but don't have good peak torque at low RPMs, so that's the trade-off that you make there. And then the motors at the very bottom of these torque RPM curves typically have either very low kV or not very good magnetic design, or both. The final piece of data I want to share with you is the responsiveness of these motors. I measure responsiveness by stepping the motor from 10 to 50% throttle and back to 10% multiple times, and then averaging those results together to give a measure of the acceleration and deceleration that the motor is able to create with my HQT 3x3x3 test prop. Looking at this responsiveness chart, we can see a pattern that I've observed in previous motor testing, which is that motors that can produce a lot of torque and have a high KV do really well in responsiveness tests. If you are focused primarily on responsiveness, you want your quad to be as stable in the air as possible, you need a motor that's super responsive, because you need the motor to be able to change its thrust level very, very quickly in response to commands from the flight controller to stabilize the quad against any perturbations. The T-Motor F1404, 4600 kV, we know it's a powerful motor, we know it's got a super high kV, no surprise that it's doing really well in this responsiveness test. Closely followed by the Zing 1504, which is a bigger motor, produces a lot of torque, and so is able to accelerate and decelerate that prop really fast. Then we have a whole raft of motors from Beta FPV, SpeedyBee, SkyStars and TVS, and these motors all perform very similarly, so you're going to be making the decision based on their other performance parameters. And then we have a heap of motors that are less responsive, and that's because either they don't produce much torque or they've got a lower KV, or a combination of the two. So having looked through all of the test data together, it's time for me to give you my thoughts and conclusions on each of these motors, as well as the summary scores. And I calculate the summary scores by looking at the performance parameters that we've looked at already, so max thrust, efficiency, torque, responsiveness, and dividing each of those parameters by the average performance of all the motors on test to give a score. An average motor gets a score of 100%, a motor 10% better than average, a score of 110, and a motor 10% worse than average, a score of 90%. In addition to the individual scores, you'll see total score, which is just the average of all the scores, and weight normalized score, which is the total score normalized by the weight of the motor. So a motor that's 10% heavier is going to have a 10% lower weight normalized score. Now it's time to look through the scores with a one-sentence summary of each of the motors. Zing 2 1404 3800 kV. Not a super high performing motor. If the price and availability is good, it's a pretty durable motor, so you'll buy based on price. TBS Podracer 1505. Average performing motor, but it is quite heavy, so that knocks it down the rankings. MEPS 1404 2900 kV is just too low a kV for a 4S 3-inch motor. I might try and find a MEPS 1404 with a higher kV and add it to this chart later on. Beta FPV 1404 3800 kV. I smoked one of these during my testing. The insulation on the wires is not very high temperature rated, so I'd probably steer clear of this one. Emax Eco 1404 performs decently well, probably very reasonably priced, so it could be a good choice. SpeedyBee 1404 4500 kV, low throttle response isn't that great, tails off a bit at the high end. I'd try and find a lower kV version of this motor, 4500 kV, a bit too high for 4S I think. Zing 1504, this is the first motor that I would actually recommend. It's a bit of a heavier motor, a bit of a bigger motor. It performs really well. Loads of torque, loads of thrust, loads of power. If you're not too worried about weight, this is the one you're going to pick. Brother Hobby 1404 3800 kV. It's a light motor which helps it in terms of weight normalized score, but there are better, lighter motors I think, so I would probably move past this one. Holly Bro Ripper, solid average performing motor, perfectly fine choice, buy on price. Flyfish Flash 1404, again 4500 kV, a bit too high in terms of kV, so I'll try and find a lower kV version and test it and add it on. Beta FPV 1404, I smoked two of these 4500 kV motors during this testing. I would steer clear of this one until they up the temperature rating on the enamel. SkyStars 1404 3800 kV, this is my favourite motor from all the ones that I've tested. Really lovely throttle curve, great efficiency, great power, great responsiveness, great torque, can't fault it. Happy Model X1404. This is the efficiency choice for long range if you want a very light motor. This motor is very lightweight and very efficient. It's excellent for long range. The performance overall though is not great in terms of maximum thrust. So it's going to be a cruising motor, not a freestyle motor. And then we have the T-Motor F1404 4600 kV. Bananas power, great responsiveness, pretty lightweight. It comes top of the charts, solid recommendation. You will need to add a little bit of throttle expo to tame the bottom of that throttle curve and help give you a bit more low throttle control. But if you do that, it's going to be a great motor for you. So there you have it. If you enjoyed this video and found the information useful, please consider supporting the channel, either directly through Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee, or indirectly using any of the affiliate links you can find down in the video description, including Amazon. If you're planning a big Amazon shop, click through on my affiliate link. It won't cost you anything. Amazon will make a little bit less profit, and you'll be supporting more content like this to help everyone have a better FPV experience. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one, and until next time, happy flying. Hi there everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today's video is a super special video because we are kicking off a whole new video series looking at optimizing the snot out of one of these little guys. This is a Tiny Whoop, and in this video series we are going to be looking at every part of the drivetrain of this little guy. We're going to be testing props, motors and ESCs to get the maximum possible performance, whether you're looking to fly for the longest time or just go as fast as possible and beat everyone else around the track. In the next video, I'm going to be testing just a few Tiny Whoop motors. So make sure you like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss that video when it comes out. But today we are going to be starting with the easiest thing that you can do to get way more performance out of your Tiny Whoop. You don't have to change any parts, don't have to change motors, don't have to change props. All you have to do is optimize your ESC settings. You can do this today, you can do this right now, and you're going to get a whole heap more performance for almost no effort. So let's not waste any more time, let's dive right into it and get those ESC settings perfectly dialed in. If you've been following the channel recently, you might have seen that I'm wearing some awesome new drone-themed t-shirts. I've been working with an amazing designer to create some bold, bright graphics capturing my favourite moments in FPV. Right now we're launching 4 designs: the Drift Chase, Mid-Air Motocross, One Pack Bando Rip, and the Mountain Dive. You can get these graphics as a high quality print on a t-shirt or jumper like I'm wearing, or you can get them as a tote bag, notebook, sticker, or a face mask.